program that we launched earlier this year. We put together this boot camp especially for Virginia, and I want to thank all the Virginians out there that help provide ideas for speakers and content. Really excited about the day ahead and the chance to talk to all of you about accelerating EV adoption in Virginia. I do want to start by recognizing we are going through some tough times now and got a lot of challenging struggles. Not only are we coming to you virtually through this webinar, but we've got a lot of new situations, and part of that is the pandemic. It's had a big impact on our economy. It's had a big impact on the auto industry broadly, and it has had an impact on the electric vehicle industry as well, which we're here to talk about today. But I do think it's heartening to note that while we have seen some delays in some of the announcements about new vehicle models rolling out and so forth, we've seen a continued commitment from automakers and continued demand from buyers. So those two things are kind of lifting our spirits. We'll be taking these and some other considerations in mind as we seek to explore how to accelerate EV adoption for Virginia. So we're going to be talking for the next few hours about how to accelerate Virginia's electrified transportation future. We're calling this a boot camp. Please do not worry about that term. We do have an admiral joining us today, but there's no push-ups, I guarantee, no burpees. We do hope to exercise your brains, get the juices flowing, get you in good shape for a lot of hard work in the policy realm coming over the next year or two. That being said, we do encourage you to stand up and move around, keep the blood flowing. I know we've all been chained to our desks, many of us, since the pandemic started. So feel free to jump up and do your own kind of boot camp if you need to. Let's go through a few housekeeping things before we get rolling. Just a few things to help us keep organized. First off, please do sign in. Use the chat box for that, just your first name, last name, organization. We want to see who's out there, want everybody to know who's out there. We're thrilled to have so many folks joining us, but that means we can't really go around the room and have everybody introduce themselves. And so we'll have to do that virtually, but please do sign in. Also, we will be recording the boot camp. We'll be sharing that later. We'll be sharing the slides later as well. So in case you're feverishly writing notes, just know you can go back and kind of view that as well and share that with others if you have folks that weren't able to join us today. We have a great lineup of speakers. We're not going to read through all their bios, however, so we will have those hyperlinked both in the agenda, and then we'll post them in the chat box. If you want to read a little bit more about who's speaking, you can find out about it that way. Also for the chat box, again, your friend, please use that for any questions. We'll be feeding those to the speakers. We're going to try to get in as many questions as we can. So please just put those in the chat. And then finally, you can please chat privately to EV Tech. EV Tech is our good buddy Annie, who will help answer any tech questions. And also, if you want to get in the line, get in the queue for the fishbowl discussion later, please do send her a note as well. And then finally, we want to hear back from you. We want to get your feedback and thoughts on how this went. So we'll be sending out a survey, very short survey afterwards to have you give us that input. So let me just give you a preview of great things to come. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers coming, really span a broad variety of perspectives. We've got leaders from across government, from the private sector, the military, nonprofit sectors, and what we're hoping to accomplish with all of their remarks and the discussion to follow is helping all of us learn more about why EVs are really a fantastic technology, where the technology is heading, lots of changes in the next couple of years coming. We're going to talk about what is Virginia already doing. There's some things that are already laying the groundwork for an electrified transportation future, and then how can we accelerate those efforts? How can we move us farther, faster? So let's pause now to get to know each other just a little bit more. Through the wonder of virtual polling, we've asked a few questions and hopefully folks have had a chance to answer. So we want to go ahead and share the results that just give us all a little bit of sense of where we're coming from and what's our background on EVs. So it looks like the first one there, how long have you been part of efforts to advance EVs in Virginia. Kind of, nicely split a little bit. A bunch of folks just getting into the fun here, less than a year, but also a good group of folks at it for 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5+ years. So great to know that, and we'll definitely try to have everybody learn something new, regardless of how long you've been at it. And then the second question is, if you have purchased or plan to purchase an EV, what would be your top 2 motivators? People come to EVs for many different reasons. It looks like cleaning air and protecting the environment is the winner here in Virginia, or at least among this webinar, with some other motivations there as well. So that's helpful. That's really good to know. And we're going to talk quite a bit about what those benefits are from EVs, from clean air and greenhouse gas emissions reductions and so forth. All right, well, thank you for that. That's your first part of audience participation. Please keep it up. We'll have some other fun audience participation coming down the line as well. You can go ahead and take down that poll. So we're going to share a little bit about who we are now that you've shared a little bit about yourselves. We are the Electrification Coalition. We're a national nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, and we are dedicated to accelerating the adoption of electric vehicles at mass scale across the United States. That's a big, audacious goal. We're really excited to be working on it. We began this trek over a decade ago and have really seen some great progress along the way. We're motivated first and foremost by the need to reduce our oil dependency and the related energy and national security risks that that dependency carries. And we'll hear about that a bit from some of the speakers later today, as well as the other risks that are associated with our current oil dependence. So of our team of more than 24 folks, we've got a team dedicated to you, dedicated to Virginia. Really excited to be working with you. You'll see here some of the photos of these folks. Andrew Linhart is the program manager that's in the lead with Virginia. I know he's talked and met and had great conversations with all of you over the last 3 or 4 months now. I'm Sue Gander. You saw that there with as the managing director. Also with us today is Ben Prochaska, who is our national director. He's based in North Carolina. He is going to be helping out with the Q&A session. So you'll get to meet him a little bit later today. And then we have a host of other folks that are supporting this effort, including at the state level as well as at the local level. Great team that's here. Aaron Biles, Will Dreyer, Brad Nelson, and Cher Taylor. So all of us are here to help you along with others and help think about how we move EVs forward in Virginia. So I just want to focus a little bit more on this dependency on oil and the role in the transportation sector. You probably do know, and now you'll see it right here, that 92% of the US transportation sector is powered by oil. And that's the dependency that we're so concerned about. But flipping that on its head, one of the benefits of, additional benefits of reducing oil dependency is lowering greenhouse gas emissions. There's a chart there that shows that transportation is now the leading source of Virginia's greenhouse gas emissions. That's due in part to the great success that folks have had over the last few years in particular in helping bend down that curve in the electric power sector. So kudos to all of you who worked on those efforts. But that means we've got this challenge in the transportation sector to tackle as well. So how do we electrify transportation exactly? We're at pretty low levels adoption right now across the country. Virginia is no different, but some really pretty audacious goals out there, as I mentioned. We do it one vehicle, one city, one state, one fleet at a time. And our policy work that spans the local, state, and federal levels has really helped us find out how we can do that and how we can all work together on electrification. We've led some really incredible award-winning programs like the Climate Mayor's EV Purchasing Collaborative. We helped create the Smart City Challenge, and we're supporting the American Cities Climate Challenge, among other programs. So through the Climate Mayor's EV Purchasing Program, for example, we've helped more than 200 mayors across the country, including 7 right here in Virginia, add EVs to their city's fleets through a really innovative bulk purchasing and financing program. It includes everything from Nissan Leafs to Thomas school buses. So Those cities can get whatever kind of vehicle or most every kind of vehicle that they see at a good price, get it into their fleet, and really just help EVs show up on the roads. We've also created a bunch of new innovative community-based programs around the country. We call these our community accelerator programs, starting in Fort Collins, Colorado, moving to many cities, including Rochester, New York, kind of in that mid-size, and even some rural areas, and had really great success, tripling the average adoption of EV rates through a whole combination of outreach and partnerships with stakeholders on the ground. Right now, we're also piloting a new freight electrification project. Really excited about this, really excited about the opportunities in the medium duty and heavy duty space. We'll talk a bit more about that as well. And collectively, what we've learned from these efforts is that we can get to an electrified future. There are many, many pathways, and really excited to be working with Virginia at the state level to help move that forward. So we launched our EV State Policy Accelerator Program just earlier this year in January. We're taking a deep dive in 5 states, Virginia, as well as Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. And this boot camp is one of the 4 pillars of our work. So in addition to this meeting today, we are developing a policy blueprint. We're going to talk a little bit about that later today. We've got a policy toolkit we're developing with resources for folks to draw upon, help answer questions around EVs. And then we're also looking for opportunities for on-the-ground deployment and thinking about how those can help build support for action and help drive that policy change back up at the state level. We also, in addition to our deep dive efforts, have a policy rapid response team where we've been working with states across the country and offering technical assistance as well. So we thought it'd be useful to reflect just a little bit on what's already happened in Virginia around EVs. We've got some great things here that have already started, including some of the plans and the actions that have you'll see listed here. Notably, we've got a significant amount of incentives that have started going to both the EV charging network as well as electric transit buses and school buses. So a great foundation upon which to build. I think it's notable that Virginia was the first out of the gates with their VW settlement RFP, really helped put them on the map for that, and excited to build upon this foundation. So as we think about what does this mean to electrify transportation in Virginia, we wanted to share some of the multitude of benefits that come along with that. There's 7.2 million vehicles on the road. What does it mean for Virginians if we move that towards electrification? You'll see there the benefits to improved health. We took these results from the recent American Lung Association report that came out. There's an opportunity to expand green jobs, build the clean vehicle sector in Virginia. There's a great opportunity and urgency to address and improve inequities among people of color and disadvantaged communities, build that into the policymaking process, not have that be an add-on. There's a great opportunity in reducing dependency in terms of the dollars spent every year on oil going out of state, instead of keeping that money in state and having the domestic supply of electricity provide that fuel. And then there's also a great opportunity to reduce emissions in greenhouse gases. This chart here on the right shows what the potential could look like. That includes also some reductions in vehicle miles traveled that we built into those curves, that just demonstrates the ability to get there and the bulk of the emissions that could be reduced. And it's going to take a number of years, but now is the time that we want to start going. So where are we in terms of that market? These are a few stats that we've put together with the help of Atlas Public Policy. If you're not familiar with them, they're a DC-based policy firm. They started back in 2015. They're really known for providing data to inform strategic decisions. We've got a whole set of information. We just took a little bit of what they provided, and we'll be posting more of that on our website, so you'll get to see even more information about where Virginia's at. I think what you'll see here is that there's some great starting points, some especially good development in the EV charging deployment, but also ways to go, right? So that's what this boot camp is about, is thinking about how do we get those numbers even higher. So I mentioned our work is focused on Virginia, along with the other 4 states we mentioned. And what we saw in Virginia was the opportunity to build momentum. Really impressed with the great leadership at the state and the local level, great engagement by the utilities, by the private sector. You can hear from many of those today, and a very supportive advocacy community. So we think this combination bodes really well for Virginia, and our program is dedicated to a 2-year effort to help move things forward. Really excited about what we can do in those 2 years and beyond. So with that, invite you all to buckle up. We're going to get started with a great array of speakers and a great discussion, as I mentioned, and we hope that you'll drive away with more passion for EVs. We hope you'll make some connections with some of the speakers we have here, maybe some ideas for some new partners and some ideas for some new policy actions. And if you want to follow up, this is the contact information for Andrew. I think many of you already know him, but we welcome you getting in touch with him or anyone at the Electrification Coalition. So with that, we're going to turn to our first speaker. It's Admiral John Harvey. He's a member of our Energy Security Leadership Council, one of the retired military officials who helps us tell our story about the national security, energy security risks that go along with oil dependency. Many of you may be familiar with him through another hat that he's worn after he retired from the Navy after more than 39 years of service. In 2013, he was appointed as the Virginia Secretary of Veteran Affairs and Homeland Security by Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe. So we're excited to hear from him and get a little bit more of the story of why EVs are so important. He's not able to be with us today in person, so we're going to have a video that he's recorded for us. Invite you all to listen here.
Good morning. I'm very glad to be part of the Electrification Coalition's Virginia Electric Vehicle Policy Bootcamp. I'm Admiral John Harvey, now retired from active duty, but in my final tour in the Navy, I commanded U.S. Fleet Forces Command down in Norfolk. Additionally, after retirement, I had the great honor and privilege of serving the Commonwealth of Virginia as the Secretary of Veterans and Defense Affairs during the Governor Terry McAuliffe administration. It was during my service in Governor McAuliffe's cabinet that I learned a great deal about how business was done at the state and local level, and the key role played by the various elements of our state government in developing and sustaining partnerships of other local government organizations, private entities that operate in the public interest, and purely commercial businesses in pursuit of common goals in the public interest. Transportation issues were always one of the toughest nuts to crack from a public policy perspective. After all, every citizen has a view, generally a pretty strongly held one, concerning the urgent need to address local traffic problems. But they hold an equally strong view that fixing those very same traffic problems should be done in a manner that doesn't require them to pay higher taxes. Despite this fundamental disconnect, a great progress has been made in Virginia over the past 10 years in addressing a multitude of transportation-related issues to the benefit of all our citizens, our environment, and the Commonwealth's economy. And that is why we are here today, to continue to make this necessary progress in this critical area for our state and for our nation. My presence today comes about since I'm also a member of SAFE's Energy Security Leadership Council, a group of business and former military leaders committed to reducing U.S. oil dependence. I'd like to explain now why electric vehicles are more than just an environmental or transportation issue. They are an issue of national security. The United States is the world's largest oil consumer, accounting for 1/5 of the daily supply of oil, more than 70% of which is used to power a transportation system that is 92% dependent on petroleum fuels. Oil is traded on an unfree, opaque market dominated by OPEC and Russia, countries that share neither our strategic priorities nor our free market values. Oil is a volatile commodity, prone to spikes, with prices affected by a myriad of factors beyond U.S. control. And despite being the world's largest oil producer, the U.S. is still unable to control the price of oil. And events like the COVID pandemic show we are unable to affect prices. This dependence on a volatile commodity jeopardizes U.S. economic sovereignty and reorders U.S. foreign policy priorities. We spend $81 billion per year just to protect oil supplies in the Persian Gulf. And as you know, Virginia is very important to our U.S. military posture. We have over 130,000 active duty members of the armed forces currently serving in Virginia, the second most of any state in the country. We have the highest total defense presence of any state, with more than 250,000 active duty and reserve members of the military and associated contractors on 31 major bases and installations. The solution to our oil dependency is to diversify fuels. Electricity is diverse, domestic, and low and stable in price. Advances in electric vehicle technology make it most compelling an option in the near term for greater consumer fuel choice. The electricity that powers electric vehicles is domestically generated from a diverse group of energy sources, which are transitioning toward an ever cleaner energy grid. Electricity prices are also cheaper and more stable than fossil fuels. Virginians collectively paid more than $10 billion on gasoline in 2018, one of the highest levels of any state. Recharging an electric vehicle with American-made energy can save 44% of that in Virginia, an average savings of more than $500 every year solely from reduced fuel costs. And electric vehicle drivers save even more from lower maintenance costs and no oil changes. Electric vehicles emit zero tailpipe emissions, have much lower total lifetime emissions than their fossil fuel counterparts, and have a much lower total cost of operation. With the COVID pandemic's impact on the U.S. economy, electric vehicles also offer a chance for the U.S. automotive sector to build for the future. Our auto industry employs a skilled workforce and invests heavily in research and development to produce high-tech products at scale. The auto sector supports 9.9 million jobs in this country and pumps nearly $1 trillion into the economy each year. Maintaining this sector and positioning it for growth is vital for our position in the global economy. Widespread deployment of electric vehicles gives Virginia and the rest of the country a chance to break our addiction to oil and move toward environmentally cleaner transportation using American-made vehicles powered by American-made energy. Developing a domestic supply chain and cooperating with allies, we will help reduce our dependence on Chinese products and components and build the next generation of transportation in America, in Virginia. As I've laid out, energy security is truly a matter of national security. And the way we achieve U.S. energy security in times of tough competition is to focus on transportation electrification. Electric vehicles can help us reduce our oil dependence, transition to American-made vehicles using U.S. energy that is getting cleaner every day, and position the country to be a leader in the 21st century economy. I'm looking forward to hearing about what this group of innovative thinkers and doers can accomplish to accelerate the widespread introduction of electric vehicles in Virginia and make the Commonwealth an electrification leader. Thanks so much for being with us today, and my very best wishes to you all.
All right, thank you, Admiral Harvey. Hope everyone enjoyed that message. I think you really touched on the whole array of why so many Virginians are excited about moving towards transportation electrification. We're going to hear from our next speaker about how that is unfolding. We'll get a state of the state address from state of the state of EVs in Virginia from Chris Bast. Let me just pull him up here now. So I don't really think he needs an introduction. I think many of you know him already as the Chief Deputy Director for the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality. He's a great crusader on these issues. I'm really excited to have Chris with us today. Thank you for coming to us amidst a very, very busy time. Really excited to hear about how things are going in Virginia and what we can look forward to in the future. Thanks, Chris.
All right, thank you very much, Sue. I appreciate that. And thank you to everybody for joining us. First, just a word of apology if my presentation here is a bit clunky as I refer to my notes. I have been back at work for an hour and a half after about 8 weeks of parental leave. And so I'm still trying to get my act together here. So thank you all for joining. Again, my name is Chris Bast, Chief Deputy at DEQ, and my focus in my work is really on climate action, and with a specific emphasis on transportation, decarbonization, and environmental justice. And so a key part of my job is working on behalf of the Secretary of Natural Resources, Matt Strickler, and Governor Northam to coordinate climate activities across state government and to work at the intersection of climate policy and politics. And so that's where EVs, transportation electrification, decarbonization really fits into that. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the context within which we're doing this work right now, and a little bit of what we've done and what we see as being on tap for us to do more. Before I get started, just a word of things that happened yesterday. I know that we are in the midst right now of a time period where the federal government is currently absent in this conversation, and in fact, actively working to prevent the decarbonization of our transportation system, and to prevent action on climate change. But yesterday we had a couple of really great announcements. I think everybody probably knows about California's announcement that Governor Newsom announced that the state will be banning the sale of the internal combustion engine by 2035. It's another great example of California's leadership on this, and you know, they have historically brought the rest of the country along with them as they leverage the size of their economy towards these great policy goals. But second, a little less heralded, is the announcement on Michigan, sort of the home of the auto industry in this country. Governor Whitmer signed a bill committing the state of Michigan to a 100% carbon neutral economy by 2050. And so for our work here on electrification, a really great signal for, you know, where we are headed and what states are committing to, and really emphasizing that states will continue to lead the way. So here in Virginia, transportation electrification is important for a number of reasons. In particular, it is aligned with three major points of emphasis for the Northam administration. That's climate change, equity and environmental justice, and building and growing the clean economy. So I'll talk about each of these three things briefly. So first, climate change. I think many of you know, I've heard me say repeatedly, that transportation is the largest source of greenhouse gases in Virginia, between 40 to 50%, depending on the year. You know, sort of my refrain lately has been, over the past couple of years, we have been laser focused on the electricity system and have made extraordinary progress on clean energy. Passed the Virginia Clean Economy Act, we are joining the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative and ensuring that we transition to 100% clean energy economy, clean electricity economy by mid-century. We are also investing heavily in energy efficiency as part of that. But of course, tackling climate change at the scale and pace required means we must rapidly decarbonize the transportation sector. And that electrification is a key part of that. Important to note, I think that, you know, when we talk about electrification as a climate strategy, we should mention that, you know, decarbonizing transportation does have three major legs. Most people consider three major legs to that stool. Clean fuels, more cleaner and more efficient vehicles, and reducing vehicle trips. And so, you know, we don't want to ignore one at the expense of the other. You know, all of these three things will work together. Electrification does get us, you know, it very clearly checks the box on a cleaner fuel and also on more efficient vehicles. The amount of energy used to move a vehicle is much less with electricity because of the reduced heat and waste. And so, you know, we are checking two of those boxes and likely in a lot of ways checking a third as well. But it is important to mention it's one of three strategies for decarbonization. On equity, of course, street level vehicle pollution is a major detriment to public health. We know that. We also know that exposure to vehicle pollution, the criteria pollutants like NOx and particulate matter, PM 2.5 in particular, that exposure to vehicle pollution is much worse among people of color and low income communities that are often located along major highway corridors in major logistics hubs and infrastructure like ports, airports. And this is, you know, quite literally the definition of environmental injustice. And so a key outcome that we're looking for when we think about EVs across this administration is to facilitate the transition to electric transportation so that the benefits of EVs, the clean air benefits, the economic benefits of electrification accrue to those communities which have historically been the most burdened by the fossil fuel transportation system that we have now. And that's an important lens that we should use and also an important direct outcome that we should shoot for. And then the third I mentioned was economic transition. As Admiral just said, EVs by definition use homegrown electricity as a fuel. We send billions of dollars to out-of-state and overseas oil companies to fuel our economy, and keeping those fuel dollars at home, continuing to circulate in the Virginia economy is a much better choice for many reasons. And Virginia, as you saw in Sue's introductory slides, Virginia is home to many companies that are leaders in electrification. Some of you I think are on now, Volkswagen, Electrify America, Amazon, just to name a couple, and our infrastructure, ports, airports, our local governments, the logistics hubs, they all provide great opportunity to rapidly electrify through fleet transition to electrification in ways that can then pull the rest of the economy along. So end on sort of where we're at now. Virginia has roughly 20,000 EVs currently. I think folks like Nick Nigro and Alan Harned can probably know the exact number off the top of their head. It is notable, however, that half of that total has hit the roads in the past 2 years, which really is something when you think about it. The problem, of course, though, is that the growth to date has mostly been market-driven. And we know that the market is certainly transitioning to electric vehicles, but the market alone will not move us at the pace or the scale required to meet the climate challenge. And so we need to rapidly decarbonize over the next 10 years. To do that requires policy. And that is where we are poised for growth, as evident by the Electrification Coalition's commitment here to Virginia. So with the governor's commitment to climate action, environmental justice, and a clean economy, we have executive branch leadership pushing this forward. We have an EV-friendly legislature, so the political system is aligned. We have advocates and grassroots activists are coalescing around the importance of transportation and decarbonization as the key climate strategy. And we have major business interests in the state raising their voices on climate, clean energy, and EVs. So political leadership, grassroots leadership, business leadership, these three things are really setting us up for a great opportunity to take bold action in the years ahead. So the current state of state government efforts, I'm going to mention real briefly what we've done, what we're doing and planning to do, and then what we hope to do soon. And so as I've said at the beginning, we're playing a little bit of catch up. To date, much of our work that we can point to has been some tinkering at the margins. For example, VDOT and DEQ have been working together on signage along our highway corridors. The Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy and DEQ have been working together with Clean Cities on for years now on alt fuel grants and different alt fuels programs that local governments and other fleets have been taking advantage of. We've also had some targeted consumer and fleet awareness programs through some of those same opportunities. But that's been about it. up until the past couple of years. The major thrust of our state-sponsored EV efforts right now is through the administration of our Dieselgate dollars. And so, as a reminder, Virginia was awarded $93.6 million in the Dieselgate settlement. And we have really viewed this as an opportunity to provide a strategic catalyst for electrification. So we can't transform the market with this money. It's a lot of money, but it's a drop in the bucket when you talk about the transportation economy. But we can prove the technology. We can help folks gain experience working with the technology, and we can really see the transition to clean transportation. So far of that 93.6 million, and our program manager, Angela Conroy, tells me we've made a couple $1 million in interest on that. So we've got a little bit more than that to play with, but we've so far dedicated, at the governor's leadership, 82 million of that to electric transportation and counting. And so that was through a statewide EV charging network. So as Sue mentioned, we had the first contract to use our 15% for charging infrastructure awarded to EVgo several years ago. Cycle 1 of that charging network is complete. Cycle 1 was 18 fast charging sites installed across priority areas in Southwest, Central, Richmond, Hampton Roads, and Northern Virginia. And cycle 2 of that investment is currently underway. We've had more than 5 fast charging sites completed already in cycle 2, and they are rapidly being installed. Second, electric transit. The first buses of a roughly $20 million combined program using Dieselgate dollars and some other state and federal dollars. The first buses from that program have been delivered. I think the governor was participated in one of those deliveries last week. And so those electric transit buses are going to start rolling here soon. We have a clean school buses program. I believe 2 rounds of funding in 2021 are going to be announced soon. And that really is focused here at the electrification or at the environmental justice nexus here, really trying to get clean school buses into those communities which really need to prioritize public health for their communities and their kids. Port electrification, we recently announced a major partnership with the Port of Virginia to accelerate their transition to an electric port. And then the other recent announcement was the Clean Air Communities Fund. I know there are many local governments on today. I think this is a great opportunity, a $20 million funding opportunity that is going to open soon for local and state government agency electrification. Really throwing everything wide open to hear what the best ideas are from public entities across the Commonwealth to replace their diesel vehicles with electric vehicles. And so I'm really excited to see what comes in for that. Recognize that we are in a very difficult economic time right now. Public budgets are tight, but we hope through this program that we can provide some resources to help some local governments and state agencies continue to make the transition and provide some of that capital to make that happen. And so what we will do is focus on three key things. I'm sure we're going to spend a lot of time talking about more of these, especially this afternoon. But right now we've got some legislative mandates we're working through. Both VDOT and DEQ have reports and planning for both electrification and for climate change that is happening. DMME is wrapping up the EV incentive work group that was directed by House Bill 717 to identify what, if we were to have an EV incentive in Virginia, what's the ideal incentive look like? Of course, the only question that remains is funding. Fleet purchasing is an area where at the state level, we haven't really done much of anything in terms of emphasizing fleet purchasing. And so, in this administration, Governor Northam and Secretary Strickler have emphasized the importance of leading by example. And so we're looking forward to, in the last year and a half of our administration, figuring out what we can do to ramp that up. I know that the Department of General Services is working to get more EVs, like school buses and transit buses, on the state contract, and that's been helpful in some of these previous programs I mentioned. So look for more of that. And then lastly, my big thing that I want to focus on, that I focus on with my job, is on framework transportation and decarbonization policy. So this is the sort of broad umbrella policies under which we can really accelerate the transition. And so things like Clean Cars program, that's the California Vehicle Efficiency Program and the Zero Emission Vehicle Mandate. And of course, the Transportation and Climate Initiative, a Cap and Invest program, to reduce the carbon intensity of our transportation fuels and raise significant proceeds that we can then invest in clean transportation choices like electric vehicles, but also bike lanes and transit and broadband and all sorts of other things. So that's sort of my state of EVs for Virginia. I did not get the note that I needed to wrap it up. So hopefully we have some time for some Q&A, but I will turn it back over to Ben or Sue to keep us going.
Hey, Chris, it's always great to connect with you, and thanks so much for making this one of your first actions after returning from parental leave. I was expecting maybe a few questions about like, how do you find sleep? You know, how are you dealing with the diaper experience at this point? But maybe we save that for a different different virtual meeting. So I guess, and actually we have a few coming in from the crowd, so I might start with a little bit of that. One of them is just, there's a question from Charles that's just asking, how can the community of EV advocates get more engaged in helping steer where the build out of the charging network is happening? And, you know, it feels like it's, and I think this is true like all the time, right? That sometimes these processes can feel opaque even if they aren't. But what's your suggestion for how advocates might get involved in that process?
Right. You know, I think the key thing there is identifying site hosts, and you know, the EVgo is installing charging stations all over the country. They have some national agreements with big retail chains. You'll see a lot of our the Drive Electric Virginia charging stations going in at places like Wawa and Sheets and places like that. If there is a site host, or if there is a parking lot in your community that that you think would benefit from a fast charging site, and, you know, encourage that site host to get in touch with us or with EVgo. And I think that's probably the best way. You know, I mean, I think the important note about this charging network is we are focused on building out the high-powered, high-speed charging network. And so these are charging stations that really need to be located in the places where they are going to be used, but we're also looking to locate them so that by the end of the 3 cycles of investment here, we've got 95% of Virginians within 30 miles of a fast charging station. And so that is driving our work here. Of course, Electrify America is also installing charging stations at the same time. And so a lot of work is happening.
That's great and really helpful background. You know, you mentioned the efforts by the state to convert your own fleet, and the idea of leading by example, right? So a couple things we've created something called the Climate Mayor's EV Purchasing Collaborative, and I think Sue, you might not have been on yet, but opened with that as one of the things that we've worked with 7 cities in the region to help do that. But I think that's a place where we can do a lot more at the state level. But there's a question about from one of the folks, how is the state going to create any kind of formal transportation electrification plan or a strategy similar to what other states have done?
Yeah, you know, that's something that we want to do. Of course, it's something that we had planned to do, and then we lost our funding. You know, this type of planning process is not something that we want to do kind of back of the envelope. We really want to be able to put in, have good research, good analysis, lots of opportunity for stakeholder interaction, and that costs money. And so there are a number of different ways that we can resource that. We're looking to do it. I mentioned there is some legislation, I can't recall the bill numbers right now, that require both DME, DEQ, VDOT, and some other agencies to start looking at this in different ways. I know the Commonwealth Transportation Board is also interested, starting to get more interested in electrification. And so all of these state agencies are starting to do their own sort of piece of this. One of the things that I've been trying to do is kind of wrap our arms around the whole thing and see what that looks like. Hopefully, as money becomes available, we'll be able to do more. But that is definitely something that we need to do. And fleet electrification, fleet purchasing at the state level is certainly a key part of that. And one of the things that I'm really looking forward to with with this effort is to leverage the experience that the Electrification Coalition has on fleet electrification to figure out how we can really jumpstart our effort as state government. And so, yeah, I see my colleague Ronique mentioning transportation, is working on that study. I didn't know how much to make public of that, but there are different parts and pieces of this that are happening, and I think the next year is going to be a lot of progress made in that front.
That's great. We would love to, I think would love to help with making Virginia a leader on its own state fleet transition. And I think that's a great example of what we hope are some of the outcomes of this state policy accelerator, and thinking about not only what are the outcomes that you want to have, right? So the policy drivers that are also going to create those outcomes though. So, so you mentioned, and just to take another question from the crowd, I had some I was going to ask, but there's so many great questions that they're better than mine. And my dog is deciding to jump into my lap, so people may get to see him join the Q&A. But one of the questions that come up is the idea of the political will around EVs. But of course, funding's a question mark, right? And we couldn't be in a more challenging environment than a global pandemic and the economic impacts. And so, just curious if there's any answer to how the administration is thinking about framing things like an incentive, given that current economic climate.
Yeah, so we are in the middle of a special session focused on criminal justice reform, on the budget, on coronavirus, and at the same time, we were preparing for the 2021 legislative session and preparing, amendments to the budget and legislation and things like that. And, we're in this tricky part of the calendar where it is difficult for me to speculate on what we may do, what we may not do, as we are, from the administration's perspective, as we are in this policy development phase. But, there are a number of different approaches that have been talked about in terms of finding funding. I think that, I can't, like I said, I can't say what our priorities may be at this point, but, at various stages, people have talked about really looking at transportation funding broadly, looking at the different sort of nexuses for where fees are applied, and how we can sort of direct funding by assessing fees on the bad stuff to fund the good stuff, or the dirty stuff, I should say, to fund the clean stuff. And then, of course, my personal favorite is the Transportation and Climate Initiative. And so, we have been working, for over 2 years now as the Commonwealth, and this effort has been going on for longer than that, to design and implement a cap and invest program for transportation in the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast region. For folks who aren't familiar, the easiest way is to think about, and if you are familiar with RGGI, the easiest way is to think about RGGI for transportation, where we put a declining cap on the amount of carbon pollution from the transportation sector. We then require the wholesale providers of gasoline and diesel to buy allowances for the carbon content of the transportation fuel. And then at the auction of those allowances will generate proceeds that the states can use for really whatever they want, as long as it's sort of transportation related mostly. There's some tricky nuance there. That has the potential to raise hundreds of millions of dollars a year for Virginia. And it is a gigantic opportunity sort of sitting out there waiting for us to take advantage of. And we are in the final stages of putting together what the TCI program would look like, what the model rule would look like, all sort of the technical aspects of that. There are webinars happening all the time now. I think the next one is September 29th. We're going to be digging in to equity and environmental justice considerations. I think you can find information on that on the TCI website, or all of the Georgetown Climate Center and TCI's social media accounts. So that's important to pay attention to and be part of. And that's just, like I said, hundreds of millions of dollars a year, potentially for Virginia, a big, big opportunity.
Well, Chris, I think one of the things that's come up, and you can hear my dog, we set him up to be the alarm when we run out of time. It's a neat trick that I'll show you later. But I really appreciate you taking the time. It's clear that Virginia, and especially as a new dad, but Virginia has an incredible amount of expertise that is living in your brain. And I'm excited to combine that with the force of the advocacy community and think about how to make Virginia one of the national leaders on this effort. Because I think there's the potential to do this, and now it's just about how do we get there. But I think it's also demonstrated by the quality of the questions that have come in, and they've exhausted the time. So just know that we'll work to get back to those questions and think about ways to bring them into later discussions. But again, thank you so much for participating, and we're looking forward to those next steps, and glad you're going to be back in the office. And let's see what you accomplish in hour 3 back in the office, right? So now that you're an hour and a half in, I expect big things tomorrow, Chris.
I got a 10-week-old will be my version of the alarm. So.
All right. Well, thanks so much. We'll look forward to more later.
Thanks.
Back to Sue.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Chris. Fantastic stuff. Great rallying cry for all of us to get moving. All right. Well, we gave you quite a build up there, Roman. Really thrilled to have you with us, and let you go ahead and get started. Thanks so much. You can go ahead, Roman.
Great. Hello, everyone. Apologies for the confusion earlier this morning, but or this afternoon for some of you all, but we're here. And let me just share my screen real quick with you all. All right, great. So over the next 15 minutes or so, we'll be talking about how to make equity real in mobility and transportation electrification. For those of you who are not familiar with the Greenlining Institute, Greenlining is a racial and economic equity advocacy organization focused on reducing poverty and pollution. Working to reduce poverty and pollution in low-income communities of color. My name is Roman Partilla Lopez, and I'm the Environmental Equity Legal Counsel for the Greenlining Institute. We've been working over the last 27 years to ensure that racial and economic equity show up in any space that we work in. So our work cuts across working on environmental issues, but we also work on energy, we work on economic equity, we work on voting rights and other areas where we've seen impacts on low-income communities of color. So over the next 15 or 12 minutes, we're gonna talk through a couple of things and really talk how we ensure that equity shows up in the work that we're doing when we're talking about mobility or transportation electrification. But before we do that, we're gonna focus in a little bit on some of the practices that have led to the injustices and inequities and inequities in that have led to inequities in low-income communities of color. We're going to walk through some equity standards that we've been thinking through that we hope you all can take and unpack as you all think about the policies that you all develop. And then think through this framework of operationalizing equity. And if time permits, we'll talk through some examples of what policies look like that have embedded equity. So as I mentioned before we jump into, how do we get to equitable policies? We have to always take a step back and really look at, what have been some of these practices that have led to inequities in our low-income communities of color. And as you see from here, this is a redlining map of Richmond, Virginia, and may not be representative of the community you live in, but there is multiple maps that you can search, and you'll be able to see where communities were redlined years ago. And to some degree, those impacts continue to this day on communities throughout the nation. And for those who are unfamiliar with what redlining is, redlining was a practice utilized by financial institutions to determine where and where not to lend. And most of those areas where lending wasn't happening was in low-income communities of color, mostly Black and brown communities. Which that practice led to loss of jobs, wages, and impacted housing, and really magnified just in economic inequities. Additionally, other practices that have really impacted low-income communities of color is our transportation system. You know, by now you all have just really know that the transportation system itself is also rooted in systemic racism and other forms of inequities. And as you can see from this image here, freeways played a major role in also, dividing communities and adding to the injustices that communities of color continue to see. This is an image of LA, of Los Angeles, but similar fixtures similar to that of redlining communities can be found of areas in wherever you're at that highlight the same way that these communities were divided. And lastly, just wanted to focus in real quick on kind of the more current affairs and what's happening and kind of the impacts of COVID and the existing pandemic. And kind of if you were to start comparing where some of the impacts are being felt the most, and you were to overlay that with maps of redlining, with maps similar to CalEnviroScreen, which is a California-specific map that outlines our most disadvantaged communities, they tend to be the same ones, right? So what this means is that the work that we've been doing to this date hasn't quite improved the quality of life of our most impacted communities. And so whenever we're working on any type of policy, whether it be EV related, transportation related, or mobility related, we must maintain these historical injustices in mind as we look to develop policies that are supposed to benefit all. So what is equity? For greenlining, when we think about equity, because I know equity has now become such a buzzword and it gets used a lot, but I think at times it's still really unclear on what we mean by when we say equity, right? There's various forms of equity, from racial equity to social equity to mobility equity. But for greenlining, when we look at this work, we really look at it through a lens of racial equity. And what that means for us is transforming the behaviors, institutions, and systems that have disproportionately harmed people of color. Equity means really increasing the access to power, redistributing and providing additional resources to communities and community organizations, and eliminating barriers to opportunity in order to empower these low-income communities of color to thrive and reach their full potential. And as I mentioned, this means power, right? Power for the community. And when we say community power, what this means is the ability of marginalized communities to influence decision in a way that addresses their needs and concerns. So to illustrate what we mean, here is an image that really highlights the difference between equity and equality, as I feel there's at times too where folks continue to interchange the two terms. When we talk about equality, it's really providing the same thing for everyone, right? And as you can see from the image, it doesn't quite benefit all. But when we really drive with equity, we're really right-sizing the solution based on the person's or community's need, as you can see from this illustration here. And so as we do this work, we at Greenlining have developed some equity standards that we hope help guide or govern the way that policies or programs are being developed. And in order to do that, these standards or these policies hopefully follow the following standards: emphasizing race-conscious solutions, prioritizing multi-sector approaches, delivering intentional and meaningful benefits, building capacity building, community capacity building, being community driven at every stage. So ensuring that we're engaging community from the beginning to the start, not just at select times. And hopefully being able to establish paths towards wealth building. With those standards in mind, we've also developed a framework where we think that we need to embed equity within every aspect of the work, right? So as you're developing a policy or program, we have to think through how equity is showing up in the goals, vision, and values, how it's showing up in the process, in the implementation, and the analysis and measurement. I think it's really key to focus in on the analysis and measurement, because we have to be adaptive. We need to be, we need to be able to course correct if need be, if we know the equity principles or standards that we're applying aren't quite reaching the communities that we need, or we're seeing the benefits that we want. So once those principles are established, once those standards are in place, and now we've operationalized equity within the policy, here are some examples of what policies look like that have taken, that have centered equity in their approach, right? So without equity, goals such as 1 million electric vehicles on our roads by 23 doesn't quite really bring that equity aspect to it. But if you were to develop a policy with equity in mind, the policy itself would look something like 1 million EVs by 2023 with low income programs. Or when we think about infrastructure, with infrastructure deployment, if it were just, just thinking about it without equity, you would just develop infrastructure and focus it in on early adopters. But if you're thinking about equity and how we ensure that it's reaching all, it would be developing a charging infrastructure program that allows for deployment in what is commonly known as these stranded assets areas. And lastly, when we think about awareness, really thinking about how you develop a culturally relevant awareness campaign, rather than kind of this blank type of approach where you're trying to reach all, but at times are not, really thinking of how you could really focus in on those communities that would benefit from an EV awareness. So with that, I thank you for your time. I know I went through a lot in 15 minutes, but I'm here, and I believe I'll turn it back over to Ben.
Yeah, and Ramon, it's great to have you, and appreciate you joining us on from the other side of the coast. Love joining the coast. We have a few minutes for some questions, and so would love to be able to think a little bit about this and talk more. So one of the things I think though that's that is coming up is this idea of how do we provide the right sort of policy mechanisms for building equity, right? So what are the things that are making the biggest impact to drive transportation electrification for equity? And what have you learned in California, and how is that sort of being translated to other parts of the country?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think in California, and I didn't spend a lot of time on this because I know we didn't have time, but really unpack some of the policies and programs that have led to equity specific programs in the state, right? Several years ago, there was a piece of legislation called the Charge Ahead initiative that required the state to really focus in on developing equity programs, and really also pivoting the existing clean vehicle rebate program to one that incorporated equity, right? At that time, in 2014, equity was starting to become a big part of the conversation, but it wasn't quite being reflective of the programs that the state was implementing. So having a policy that really directs directs an agency to move in that direction is helpful. Hopefully an agency on their own is willing to do that. And we've seen a lot of that from the Air Resources Board lately, right? Where because of the fact that they've been implementing some of these equity programs, like a scrap and replace program that's been really helpful to get lower income folks to trade in their older car and access either a used or new vehicle with an increased incentive, or a financing pilot program. But now what they're doing is they're being really creative in some of the types of programs that they're allowing that are considered equity programs. And I'll just focus in really specifically on one called the Sustainable Transportation Equity Pilot Program, which is really allowing community to identify the transportation need and priority of their region. And through that process, fund that priority need, right? And this really goes back to some of the standards that I mentioned earlier about being community driven from the beginning. And by ensuring that you're focusing in on what the community's needs are and really following this bottom-up approach rather than this top-down, can really help identify what those policy solutions should be to help ensure that we're really providing mobility equity and transportation equity.
So, and as a follow-up, one of the questions from the crowd was, and just a reminder, folks, please feel free to send the questions in. But can you just share a little bit more about the scrap and replace program, like some of the details, how that works?
Yeah, so the scrap and replace is really modeled after the kind of the cash for clunkers program that existed a couple of years ago. But rather than it really focused on the automaker and that aspect, is really focused on the people, right? So the scrap and replace program here really focuses in on low income communities in the state. And through the Cal Envirus Green Map, which I showed a glimpse of in one of the slides, which identifies our top 25 most disadvantaged communities, it provides an additional incentive for those who live within those communities. When they retire, they scrap their car and are able to purchase a newer, more fuel efficient car. And so it ranges, but basically a low income household could get up to $9,500 for getting rid of their older car and getting into a plug-in hybrid or a full battery electric. And the great part about it is that it's not limited to just used vehicles. I think we have the tendency to always think about the used market as an opportunity, but we also got to be thinking about policies that allow low-income folks to get into newer cars, right? We shouldn't always just be thinking about it from a used vehicle perspective. And so this program also allows them to utilize the incentive both for a used vehicle or a new vehicle. And if they purchase a new vehicle, they're also able to access the Clean Vehicle Rebate Program, which offers an additional $2,500 or now $2,000, and they're able to stack it and really get them closer to be able to afford a newer car.
Yeah, I always think, one of the things that exists is a lot of times tax credits are a little bit of a challenging issue because they don't actually work as well for low income people, right? Like that's because they don't have the tax requirement, right? So it's harder for those things to work. And that's where like sometimes transferable credits or rebates can really make a big difference and are a much more equitable solution if you're trying to think about how do you drive down those upfront purchasing costs. Yeah. One little thing that I want to ask about though, and this is me just, my own view on some of this is, a lot of times, and you brought it up, but used vehicles can be a great option for people and frankly, just anyone, right? Not just low income folks, but all people. But there is this case where, like the access to capital, or in this case, a loan, right? Loan rates are terrible for used vehicles. And so it really can create a big barrier, right? And it kind of continues this cycle of debt that can exist and all these things around sort of creating, again, equity and how transportation can solve problems. So are there any solutions that you all have looked into around, sort of that part of the nugget or that part of the problem and cracking that issue?
Yeah, and before I get to that question, just want to highlight one last thing related to the scrap and replace program, because I think it's important and ties into this question, that the scrap and replace program is also a voucher. It's not a rebate, it's an incentive that's provided up front. So when someone goes out to purchase a car, they're able to get that money on the hood and are able to use that money as that buy down. But we realized that, having an incentive on its own wasn't enough. We also had to figure out how to provide the financial support, the financing support. I mean, to be able to, if a household purchases a car that, requires some type of financing. So the state developed this Clean Vehicle Assistance Program, which is basically a financing program run by Beneficial Foundation and their set of beneficial state banks. That's a really socially focused bank that's working with low income households to get them the financing that they need, and that it's not that they're not getting into any type of predatory loan, right? That's putting them off. They're putting them in a position where they're worse off than they were before because of the need of a vehicle. So through Beneficial State Bank and the foundation, there is this program that allows a household to get a loan, hopefully a lower interest loan, but it does cap out at 8%, right? Which is a lot better than what they potentially could get out through an auto financing company or on their own.
Yep, no, that's great. Well, Ramon, as always the case, we never have enough time to dig into these issues. Really appreciate you joining. Glad we could overcome some of those technical difficulties. And at this point, we have to transition back to our next speaker. So hopefully you can be a part of the work that we're doing in Virginia and look forward to building an equitable and just transportation electrification effort. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Ramon. And we'll get a chance to continue to talk about these topics throughout the course of the rest of the day. So keep those thoughts brewing. We're going to go ahead and switch to hearing a little bit more about what's going on at the local level. Really thrilled to have Alan Harned with us. He's the executive director of the Virginia Clean Cities program. I'm going to go ahead and just hand it over to Alan. Thank you.
Great. And I'm just smashing that screen share button, so bear with me for just a minute. And I just want to thank everybody for being here. In particular, I want to thank the Electrification Coalition for pulling this together. This is actually turned out to be really, really great. I hope that you can all see my screen. And I want to also recognize the appreciation that I have for the Admiral speaking. This shows in a Commonwealth like Virginia, which has massive military resources. We have these Navy installations. This has long been a priority both for the nation and, of course, for the Commonwealth of Virginia, talking about that energy security challenge. Also want to recognize and share just a total appreciation for what everyone has done here, from local governments to state government, to legislators, to the Electrification Coalition, and really and advocates in moving this market forward. The governor is interested in reducing transportation emissions. The General Assembly is interested. Chris Bast has been just an enormous asset to this Commonwealth, and then all the attendees. And I also want to thank John Majorana, who is the Virginia Clean Cities Argonne intern, also for your interest in this and for being here today. This policy opportunity is great, but we have to do something. In the last General Assembly session, we increased the fee on electric vehicles, and that was kind of like, and we did some sort of side projects, making it so that chargers could get out there, but we're really not moving the needle forward for these technologies that do cost like $12,000 more than a regular vehicle. So we got to keep pushing. Virginia Clean Cities, we're fuel and technology neutral. We've been around since 1993. There are 90 Clean Cities coalitions, which are focused entirely on the transition of transportation fuels, the reduction of petroleum, the reduction of emissions, and a portfolio of technologies that all should lead to reduced costs, reduced spend. And so you saw in the slides that $10 billion spend, $11 billion spend in Virginia. It really is a phenomenal amount of money that we spend on that oil, and we don't need to. And so Virginia Clean Cities and our Clean Cities Coalition members, the cities, the state government, local governments have been working on planning, evaluating, budgeting, permitting, installing, marketing, ordering, training, and maintaining this vehicle transition. There's all these different steps. And it's exciting to be here because energy includes oil. A lot of times in Virginia, we talk about energy challenges, and we sort of don't mention that one piece of energy that is the largest sector of energy in Virginia. It's the largest spend, it's the largest energy, and it's the largest emissions. Although I would note that 50 million metric tons of CO2 has been the largest emissions sector for several years, for just basically the last decade. And so it's a lot of emissions, and it's great that it's an area that we can focus on. I want to chat a little bit about some serious partnerships and some examples of local government progress. Virginia Clean Cities, we work with all types of fleets and consumers, but some of our key partners are the municipalities in Virginia that are making steps forward. And so there was some talk about planning, and Richmond stepped forward a decade ago to really focus on planning for electric vehicles. And Chris Bass talked about the scope of these challenges for a statewide study. For the Richmond plan, there was a $500,000 effort to engage communities and partners. I will say that those plans continue. Charlottesville area, Charlottesville itself, Northern Virginia, Alexandria, Fairfax, local governments are working to decide how much electric transportation they can accommodate, what they can be working towards. And there's ongoing local plans and collaborative plans. Not a lot of that so there's also a lot that's not public that I can't put in the slide, but there's a lot of local governments working on this. That has led local governments to come up with ideas, rapid permitting, over-the-counter permitting that works directly between the fire officials and the energy officials to move these markets move these markets forward a little bit. So, excited about the planning components. Local governments are also taking action. I am grateful that Roanoke is participating in the call today, but in Roanoke, Virginia, is an example of some progress that can be made. Again, these vehicles are a little more expensive, and fleets often buy vehicles, cities often buy vehicles that are the lowest cost vehicle, that are the most fuel efficient vehicle, these small steps. And Roanoke traded their hybrid vehicles for used electric vehicles, moving a dozen hybrids forward into fully electric vehicles. They added DC fast chargers and chargers for their fleet. And they were able to move a dozen vehicles forward in a fast manner. Norfolk has electric vehicles in their motor pool and installed DC fast chargers publicly very early in an early project that's sort of timed out at this point. They also accepted 100 donated electric vehicle chargers from Tesla. Danville, Virginia has a vehicle to grid pilot with Nissan Leafs. Charlottesville, Virginia has done some has made some incredible progress with chargers, DC fast chargers. And while no municipality in Virginia has a lower tax rate for the electric vehicles, even though they could for all alternative fuel vehicles, Charlottesville has a grant that offers electric vehicle charging. So they help facilitate the installation of electric vehicle chargers. Transit pilots are underway, and there's so much more going on. So I just am providing a quick snapshot. There's a lot that I'm missing. The Commonwealth of Virginia is also making major progress. Department of General Services has electric vehicles in their fleet, and they accepted a fast charger install. And these things take a lot of collaboration, but it was a serious partnership to install a DC fast charger and a regular charger at the state central fleet. And Tesla has donated lots of chargers. They've donated some to the state parks, really a limited basis. States like West Virginia have taken them at all their parks, but there of course could be more work there for charging. And there's been progress with universities. I know that UVA is on this call, and so I also want to recognize their progress with electric vehicles like the Nissan Leafs, electric bicycles, adding into their task-oriented electric vehicle fleet, which are these smaller trucks. And just really exciting progress with chargers and DC fast chargers, which is the speedier charging technology. So I wanted to note that it's possible to save some money here. So what you should see on my screen is also just a fueleconomy.gov, which is a great resource. The Chevrolet Bolt electric vehicle compared with the Chevrolet Tahoe, and you would be surprised at how many fleets can actually make that jump. But you would save a fleet could save over 5 years $10,000, which may be enough to pencil this out effectively. They're very different vehicles, but for a utility, they provide the same service of driving cones and measuring things. So I just wanted to share that $10,000 savings and that resource, fueleconomy.gov. Here are some photographs of progress in the Great Commonwealth of Virginia. And so we have a DC fast charger in Danville, Virginia, a Nissan Leaf. So that's an all electric vehicle. City of Norfolk, their motor pool is operating electric vehicles. And you can see this charging off of a site where they also have Tesla donated chargers. So again, this municipality contracted with Tesla, and Tesla just gave them 100 electric vehicle chargers through a program that's Tesla Charging Partnership. The same happened with Richmond, Virginia. So Richmond, Virginia accepted electric vehicle chargers that were donated from Tesla and from Nissan Motors, and they built an incredible facility for electric vehicle charging at Richmond's Main Street station. And another example would be installing chargers at state and national parks. And so this is also just an example of the challenges of progress. This is a $600 charger equivalent, and it took 4 years to install the charger, but it also took about 4 minutes for James Madison University to purchase the electric vehicle. So by purchasing a used electric vehicle, they were able to just rapidly move through the procurement process. And people are also buying new vehicles. Municipalities are buying new vehicles. So City of York County, we have a Chevy Volt. Norfolk Motor Pool, we have new Nissan Leafs. And again, these are some opportunities. There was a grant. I saw some questions. For a while, we had an incremental cost grant where we could offer some assistance from the state to state and local governments. That is on pause due to the American Steel requirement, but it's a program that could be reactivated with some federal changes. But York County also accepted dozens of electric vehicle chargers from that Tesla destination program. Other local examples would be Fairfax County and Jaunt, two different autonomous shuttle projects. These are totally electric, totally exciting. And so I would just say that there's been some significant progress over the last 10 years and a lot of opportunities ahead. Electric vehicle chargers should be a great opportunity for all municipalities, all planners. I know there was a question about how can people be involved in planning, and there's just a lot to be done. There are 676 electric charging station locations in Virginia, which is 1983 charging ports. Cities, towns, government, private sector, everybody's involved in this effort. An electric vehicle charger might cost about $600. So when you're getting into the chicken and the egg challenge, there's a low cost to entry for this, which is fantastic. And I talk about the fountain and the glass as my metaphor for electric vehicle charging. The glass would be an electric vehicle. You need to recharge your coffee. You need to recharge your vehicle somewhere, and that's where the fountains come in. And so for us to get to millions of electric vehicles, we'll need millions of chargers. And so there's 8 million vehicles on the road in Virginia. And if we've got less than 20,000 electrified, there is a range of equipment between where we are today and electric vehicles. So what is up next is working on that speed of filling these glasses. So the DC fast chargers are moving ahead. So in the last 10 years, we've installed some chargers. In the years ahead, really, this is a nod and appreciation to the work that the governor's office is doing with the contract for EVgo. Having these chargers within 30 minutes of people is really going to be helpful. There will be more needed. Obviously, driving that distance to get to a refueling station and then being there for a time is a challenge. But there will be faster charging ahead and more chargers. Convenience for electric chargers in every parking lot is actually sort of necessary. And it's very necessary when we start talking about equity and the challenge of how transportation costs are much higher for folks transportation costs are much higher for lower income Virginians. Transportation costs are potentially 30% of individuals' income at the low end, and they're obviously 75% of Virginians' energy costs. So we all know that this is such a significant factor, much greater factor than other energy sources. But only 40% of households have electric outlets. So as we move into transportation electrification, which could be $1 a gallon fuel, 40 cents a gallon equivalent electrical energy, we have this need for covering that gap to be sure that it's accessible to all Virginians. And so, only 40% of households have electric power within 20 feet of where they park. That's a 60% of Virginians that are going to need to be served with more planning and advanced stuff. So up ahead is DEQ's Clean Community Program, which—
Alan, I know you've got, I don't know how much more you have to go, but I did want to note that we're a little bit over time. So
I will stop. I was just going to mention that there's some DEQ money coming and a federal program focused on equity, and I will stop.
Excellent. Well, it's always good to end on a note of more money coming, and really appreciate your leadership. We are really looking forward to continuing to work with you, work at the local level as we also try to push on the state level as well. So thanks so much for being with us also.
Thanks.
All righty. So we're gonna switch now to our speaker that's gonna talk a little bit about drawing the connections between EVs and air quality and public health. Really thrilled to have Dr. Nilu Tumala with us today. She's a steering committee member of a group called Virginia Clinicians for Climate Action. This is a really important issue that does also tie back to some of the equity issues that we were we were talking about earlier. So happy to have you with us, and I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Sue. And just want to make sure that I think my slides are being shared by Will, which I appreciate. I'll just hold for a quick second. Great. All right. So thank you for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nilu Tamala, and I'm a physician at George Washington University and a member of Virginia Clinicians for Climate Action. So I'm going to give a brief overview of the public health impacts of poor air quality, specifically of particulate matter, which is a common traffic-related air pollutant. Next slide. Patients are becoming the human face of the climate crisis. This quotation by Dr. Salas, an ER physician in Boston, could not be more true. As clinicians, we are often seeing the effects of the climate crisis in our patients, whether it is patients enduring longer allergy symptoms due to lengthening of the freeze-freeze season, or young healthy patients showing up with acute kidney failure during summer heat waves. We're also seeing increased mental health concerns in the wake of intensifying natural disasters, such as the California wildfires and the overwhelming hurricane season. So these patients are real-life examples of the public health impacts of the climate crisis. Next slide. Since the Clean Air Act was implemented in 1970, emissions of major pollutants were reduced by 73% between 1990 and 2015. The EPA determined that 230,000 deaths were avoided per year due to lower concentrations of outdoor particulate matter. And that 230,000 refers to from here on out. In addition, other benefits include reductions in asthma exacerbations, reductions in heart attacks, and avoided hospital admissions for respiratory conditions, 66,000 fewer admissions per year. The economic benefits of the Clean Air Act are valued at $2 trillion in 2020. The EPA determined that the monetized health benefits of the Clean Air Act exceeded the implementation costs by a factor of 32 to 1. Next slide, please. Traffic-related air pollution. So transportation is a major source of carbon emissions that drives climate change, but also of air pollutants. TRAP, which is also known as traffic-related air pollution, has several components, including nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and particulate matter. So moving forward, I'm going to focus on particulate matter, but this is not to say that the other components are not incredibly important to monitor. For example, nitrogen dioxide is increasingly being recognized as an important indoor and outdoor pollutant generated by automobiles and has been shown to reduce lung function. One study showed that for every 10 parts per billion increase in classroom NO2 concentrations, there was a significant reduction in lung function. Similarly, sulfur dioxide exposure has also been linked to reduced lung function and an increased rate of asthma-related emergency department visits. Next slide, please. Particulate matter is a well-known health concern, and the size of the particulate matter is important, whereas smaller particles often pose a greater risk than larger ones. So in the picture on the left, you can see the size of the standard human hair is about 50 to 70 microns. And comparatively, PM10 and PM2.5 are much smaller particles. So compared to PM10, the primary contributors of PM2.5 mainly come from traffic and industries, including the fuel combustion from power plants and oil refineries. So PM2.5 indicates those fine particles that are less than 2.5 microns. Ultrafine particles include those particle diameters less than 0.1 microns, and the primary source of ultrafine particles are tailpipe emissions from mobile sources. Theoretically, PM10 particles preferentially deposit in the upper airways. Meanwhile, the PM2.5 and the ultrafine particles are much more are small enough to reach the smallest airways and alveoli, and the ultrafine particles may further penetrate the alveolar capillary membrane, which eventually spreads into systemic circulation. Next slide. So according to existing studies, particulate matter is associated with respiratory disease, specifically chronic obstructive pulmonary diseases such as asthma. It is also known that the risk and mortality rate of pneumonia increases in both children and adults with higher particulate matter exposure. Moreover, increased exposure in the high concentration of atmospheric particulate matter is associated with the development of lung cancer. So there are two main mechanisms that PM2.5 affects the respiratory tract. A lot of this, I will say, is still being studied, but the current sort of pathophysiology is that it triggers pulmonary oxidative stress. So this oxidative damage is associated with the primary development of asthma and COPD, which is known as obstructive pulmonary disease. It can also contribute to both acute and chronic inflammation. So acute exposure can cause airway hyperresponsiveness. So the body has an acute inflammatory response, which then, for example, leads to acute asthma exacerbations. The long-term exposure to particulate matter can result in airway remodeling, which can then affect underlying lung capacity. Next slide. Air pollution is also strongly associated with increased heart disease, such as heart attacks, cardiac arrhythmias, ischemic strokes, vascular dysfunction, high blood pressure, and atherosclerosis. So the molecular mechanism for particulate matter causing heart disease includes direct toxicity to the cardiovascular system or indirect injury by inducing systemic inflammation and oxidative stress, both of which are also very similar to the mechanisms for the respiratory system. So the direct pathway is that due to the size and the chemical composition of these ultrafine particles that enter the circulatory system, they can cross the lung-blood barrier. And so once it goes into the bloodstream, it causes this localized stress and inflammation, and it can result in atherosclerotic plaque instability in the blood vessels and can increase the risk of thrombus or clot formation. The indirect pathway is associated with systemic inflammation, which is a well-known risk factor for atherosclerosis progression. And those pro-inflammatory mediators are closely related to increased blood coagulability and endothelial dysfunction, which increases the risk in general, both of those, of a heart attack. Next slide. So this study from the New England Journal of Medicine evaluated the associations of inhalable particulate matter with an aerodynamic diameter of 10 microns or less and fine particulate matter with an aerodynamic diameter of 2.5 microns, with basically all-cause heart and lung mortality across multiple countries and regions. So it evaluated more than 600 cities across the globe. Notably, though, most of the countries and cities were in the Northern Hemisphere. What it found is that on average, an increase of 10 micrograms per cubic meter of both PM10 and PM2.5 were independently associated with increased mortality from both heart and lung disease. So given this extensive evidence regarding their effects on health, the daily and annual mean concentrations of PM10 and PM2.5 are regulated according to the World Health Organization. Next slide, please. So children are one of the most vulnerable populations in respect to health and air pollution. This is a prospective study done in 2004 of over 1,700 children from schools in 12 Southern California communities. Their lung function was measured annually for 8 years. The communities represented a wide range of ambient exposures to ozone, acid vapor, nitrogen dioxide, and particulate matter. And basically what they found is that over the 8-year period, deficits in lung development was associated with exposure to nitrogen dioxide and particulate matter that was less than 2.5 microns. So basically, the results of this study indicate that air pollution has a chronic adverse effect on lung development in children from the ages of 10 to 18 years. Next slide. So the question is, does cleaner air mean better health? So this is a longitudinal study published in JAMA of over 4,100 children in Southern California who were followed from 1993 to 2014. So the two graphics on the left show the relative decrease in nitrogen dioxide on the top and PM2.5 on the bottom over this 10-year period. And you can see that the relative slope downwards, essentially because of stricter regulations, there was cleaner air. And the different colors on these graphs just represent different communities that were studied. Next slide. So on the right, we now see two graphs showing the incidence of childhood asthma over this period. So to summarize the significant findings, on the top, a decline in nitrogen dioxide was significantly associated with lower childhood asthma incidence, And on the bottom, a decline in PM 2.5 was also significantly associated with lower childhood asthma incidence. So yes, cleaner air leads to better health. And in this case, it's fewer children with asthma. Next slide, please. So just a few take-home thoughts. Clean air is important for our health. Traffic-related air pollution is a public health concern, and health professionals are starting to speak out on this issue because of the direct health impacts. And electrification of vehicles is an important step in decreasing the amount of traffic-related air pollution. Next slide. So thank you all. Feel free to reach out to me via Twitter with any questions, concerns, or comments. I'm also a part of an incredible organization, the Virginia Clinicians for Climate Action, that are very active within Virginia to try to make both the air and the climate healthier for all of the people living in Virginia. So feel free to visit the Twitter at Virginia Clinicians or the website. And we've also got some forthcoming video series and a transportation page on our website. And there's also a really important health impact analysis on transportation emissions in Virginia that VCCA is putting out in the coming weeks, which will outline some of the positive health impacts of transportation reform. So thank you. And there was a question, is there a good fact sheet for decision makers with that California study on PM 2.5? So I'm assuming you're referring to the one about the asthma levels and how that improved health. Okay, perfect, yes. So, you know, I don't know that there's a fact sheet, but honestly, the study itself is actually quite straightforward to follow, or feel free to reach out to me and I'm happy to put together some facts for you too, that, you know, in terms of how to interpret the study results and what you can kind of extrapolate from that and continue to use in your discussions with other people. Thank you all, and thank you to the Electrification Coalition for hosting this important webinar.
Hey, and Dr. And I'm going to say your last name incorrectly, even though I'm the quintessential example of somebody whose name is impossible to mispronounce. But can I just, is it Tamula?
Tamala.
Tamala, sorry.
No worries.
So thank you so much for the presentation. I think that one of the things that's really interesting about electrification, right, is that it is this intersection that can focus on public health impacts, right? And I think in some ways, we get into the benefits of electrification, and it's really great when we can talk about that they have a cost benefit, they have an economic and national security benefit, but then also have a significant public health benefit. And it's starting to show, you know, more and more there's this discussion around the idea of public health has a really strong equity component. And a lot of disadvantaged communities can be the most impacted. And I'm curious if you're in your studying and in your work, if you're starting to dig into any more of sort of specific mobile source pollution and how it's disproportionately affecting low-income communities or disadvantaged communities within the freight sector.
Definitely. You know, I think that studies are pretty comprehensive in showing that, you know, people of a lower socioeconomic status and many minority communities tend to live near roadways. And so they're definitely more exposed to traffic-related air pollution. I have a patient who I saw during COVID, like when most people were in quarantine, and you know, he kind of joked with me that he's been in quarantine for years because when he goes and sits outside, he lives near the highway, and you know, his whole community, there's just, the air pollution is just too high for him to even be outside with his asthma. And so it's definitely a huge issue of concern for communities of color and for people of lower socioeconomic status. I think there's another study that showed that there's a 66% increased exposure to traffic-related air pollution to certain communities of color as compared to white Americans.
So when you look at the idea of, like, you know, policy instruments, and especially when you think about specifically transportation, right? Because there's a lot around, you can, you know, we work, like you look at the energy sector, right? And there's a lot of work that's happened around the single stack, right? The single exhaust of power generation. But what kind of policy mechanisms are you seeing show up to deal with mobile source pollution and air pollution like this?
So you're talking about like what sort of like electrification? Sorry, I'm not quite sure.
What policies are really working to actually start to deal with the idea that if transportation is a big contributor to health impacts, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the policies out there that you're already seeing that are really making a difference, and what kind of things could Virginia be considering?
Yeah, so I think that in general, kind of coming from the clinician standpoint, we tend to partner a lot with other organizations that I think are a little bit more adept with sort of transportation reform. But I think that obviously electrification is really important, but also sort of improving walkways, improving bikeways, improving public transportation is huge, especially for those communities that might be more vulnerable to exposure to like roadway traffic. And the other thing I think, just when talking about equity, is that Black children have the highest rates of asthma. And so, when you're talking about increasing a risk factor to their breathing, then you're not only contributing to their health impacts, but also to their economic impacts of managing a chronic lifelong illness.
When you get into the economic impacts of lifelong chronic illness,
Mm-hmm.
are there any like studies or reports or good facts that you found really help to articulate why it's a good economic decision, not only a good public health decision, but why it's a good economic decision to do a better job on reducing pollution from transportation?
Yeah, no, there are definitely some sites. I'm not gonna lie, I can't remember any numbers off the top of my head right now, but they have looked at sort of like childhood asthma control, and sort of when kids have to have both for like increased ER visits, so like calculating how much it costs parents to take their kids to the ER more often when they have acute asthma exacerbations, and then the cost of the medications themselves. And there have been some studies that have looked at how much does it increase to have worsening asthma exacerbation. So it's one thing just to have asthma, but it's another thing to have increased number and frequency and intensity of the exacerbations.
Yeah, there's actually this organization we worked with called Quantified Ventures, and they were dealing with the idea of impact investing, right? And the idea of if you can get rid of the causes of what exacerbates asthma, places like Johns Hopkins and others are really invested in the idea that they should work towards those solutions, and it actually helps save money in the long term.
Definitely. I mean, I think preventative medicine has always been proven to be economically savvy. Like as long as we sort of do what we can to prevent the disease itself, it's always going to be more economically beneficial.
Well, Dr. Smala, once again, we want to thank you for the great presentation. I'm sure we're all thinking a lot more about the public health impacts and benefits of transportation electrification. And thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And back to Sue.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Great presentation. Really appreciate that detail. And you actually broke it down really well. I was worried it was going to be, a little more complicated, but it's a pretty clear picture. So, that's a strong message to be sent. So we're going to go now to a great panel that we've got lined up to hear from some of the manufacturers in this space, folks that are getting those vehicles that we're so eager to have. Right. I'll just do a quick rundown on who we're going to hear from, and then we're going to turn to each of them. They've got about 5 or 6 minutes that they're going to present, and then we're going to turn to some Q&A. So go ahead and start putting your questions in that Q&A section, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. So I'm going to read these folks out in the order of their appearance. So we'll hear from Keith Brandis, Vice President for Volvo North America. We saw earlier about the assembly plant that's here in Virginia. We're going to hear then from Albert Gore, Policy and Business Development Lead at Tesla. Great to have you here, Albert. We'll then go to Tom Van Heek, who's with General Motors. He's the Policy Lead on Mobility and Climate Change. Thank you, Tom, for joining us. And then Matt Nelson, Director of Government Affairs from Electrify America, who is headquartered here in Virginia. So great to hear from you all, and we'll go ahead and let Keith get going, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you, Sue. Hello, everyone. I'm going to try here to share my screen. Let me know when you can see it. Start my video, okay? Is it showing yet?
It's not showing. If you want us, we can run them from our end.
Maybe that's quicker because it's going to take a while, I guess, to go through on our Wi-Fi.
Gotcha. All right, we're pulling them up right now. Look at that.
Great. Yes,
All
that
right.
works. So let me say thank you to the Electrification Coalition and Virginia representatives specifically from both education, municipalities, the industry in a broad sense as we talk about both policy and regulations. And Volvo Trucks, who I represent, has actually been in Virginia with our major manufacturing plant for 45 years. And we're talking about heavy duty trucks. So if you want to talk about cars, I'm sorry, I don't drive a Volvo car and I can't help you. But we're very proud to employ a large workforce there. And I want to talk to you a little bit about a project we call Volvo Lights. If you go to the next slide, please. Lights actually stands for Low Impact Green Heavy Transport Solutions. All right, which means it's more than just the big trucks. It is in fact the largest public-private partnership with total investments over $90 million, funded by California Air Resources Board, who awarded it to the South Coast Air Quality Management District. It's a $45 million award, so roughly 50% cost share. And it's actually supported from their cap and trade funds. In other words, there's a tax that they collect on the sale of fuel, and then they reinvest it into diesel and other types of heavy duty industries. And then our objectives are to address the total end-to-end near zero emission vehicles. So how can we take out diesel and replace that with battery electric trucks, reduce greenhouse gas, improve air quality, and show a sustainable freight moving? If you go to the next slide, please. Volvo is in fact the prime contractor, and we are starting this journey as a project lead so that we can demonstrate how that this can work in a commercial environment. I would say 5 years ago, there's no way that you could put battery electric trucks together, but we're taking an end-to-end view of this because we know it's not just to put a couple of trucks on the road. You have to have charging infrastructure, and you have to be prepared to support this. And I'll talk about some of the training initiatives that we have. Next slide, please. If you've ever been to the LA Basin, you know it has some of the worst air quality in the nation. It's the second largest populated area, 13.5 million people. And there's a lot of movement between the ports of LA and ports of Long Beach and what we call the Inland Empire, where a lot of the warehousing and logistic companies operate. So among these very crowded and important corridors, we have placed customers, DHE and NFI, that have warehouses, they have truck depots, and we are putting 23 battery electric trucks in their hands. We're also changing out to 29 battery electric freight equipment, such as forklifts and yard tractors, putting in 58 chargers, and including for the first time a heavy duty public charger at a truck stop. We have our dealership in 2 locations there where we've trained technicians, we put in spare parts, we put in the diagnostic tools so that they're prepared to jump on it and get right away, to keep the trucks rolling. And we've designated 2 community colleges for technician training. We've sent over $200,000 in parts and support for their curriculum to train the technicians of the future. On the customer sites, they're also installing 1.8 megawatts of solar energy. So we want to address the electric generation. As I said, the port's involved to plan for how they can best utilize electric trucks in the future. And in the dark areas there, you see that unfortunately, the worst air pollution happens among disadvantaged communities. It's where the trucks are idling, they're stop and go, and where the air quality impact will be most measured. Next slide, please. We couldn't do this alone. In fact, we've signed 15 partners, and our CEO is talking about partnership is the new leadership. It's the way in which our business model is evolving because we can't just produce trucks. We, in fact, have to bring these important partners in with their level of investment and expertise in order to grow this from just a few sites to a number of sites and roll out across the region. You'll go to the next slide then. Where are we? Well, we've already delivered 5 trucks from the New River Valley plant to California, and we're setting up our production by the end of this year. And we'll have a big commercial is so exciting to think about the trucks being built in Virginia. We, of course, have focused on where we see the fastest growth, which is in high populated, dense traffic areas, in order to blend, if you will, the batteries and the technology where it's at today. We think that short out and back types of hauls are probably the first place to start. And that way you can have private charging infrastructure at a customer's depot, and they can make their daily routes. We are finding it's costly and it is quite time consuming. And for the commercial fleet owners, time is just as important as cost. And it's taken many months. In California, and I'd have to check in Virginia, the regulations do not provide to charge for electricity for heavy duty trucks. So public charging stations are prohibited until the regulation changes. You may see this in shopping malls for cars, but today it's not allowed for trucks. Where I'm asking for your help today, and many of the municipalities that are represented from Blacksburg to Roanoke to Richmond to Chesapeake to Northern Virginia, is you need to think about your engineering departments and your building and inspection and public safety and fire departments. Are they ready to support this transition? We found that, unfortunately, this is such a new area for many municipalities. They may not understand that permitting can delay and or complicate the installation of these heavy duty chargers. It's a question of whether you want to be easy to do business with. And of course, we're working with the local public utility company because in many cases, we're going to have to upgrade the electrical grid. I think I have one more slide. Today, I thank you for letting me tell you a little bit about a large public-private partnership. It's a way in which industry is able to match tax dollars to make these types of investments to form a beachhead, a place to start. This doesn't solve all of the problems, and we know that it's going to depend very heavily on whether or not customers see a return on their investment before they make this step into electric vehicles. But I can tell you that there are fleets operating in your communities, and we think your community stakeholders would be very interested in doing something similar here in Virginia. We have ports, we have high traffic corridors, and of course, we can have a wonderful future by working together.
All right, thank you, Keith. Well, that sounds like a really generous invitation, if you will. So love to talk more about that and some of the points that you raised around jobs and so forth. Let's go ahead and hear from Albert, bring Tesla into the conversation. Of course, you're active across all vehicle sectors and infrastructure. So love to hear your thoughts on Virginia.
Great. Thanks so much for having me. I love the question, what are you most excited about for EVs in Virginia? Because, while there are challenges to EV deployment, there's mostly a really good story to tell about demand for EVs and advancements in technology and product availability. So love to talk about that stuff. What I'm most excited about is expanding access to EVs for all Virginians, and that means continuing to bring down the price, bring down the total cost of ownership, and making it easier to demonstrate what EVs can do and then deliver them across the whole state.
Awesome.
And
sorry to interrupt you. I just want to see it all. If you could switch to your slideshow version. Is that possible?
Oh, I'm sorry. Is it not sharing?
Nope. It's still wonderful slides, but it will be even better if we can see them.
Oh, I see. Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's all right.
Got it.
Perfect. Thanks.
Oh, let's see. Hang on, I'm putting an issue here. The problem is I have my notes open. Is it all right if let's see.
You can go ahead like this. It's good. We're good.
You sure? Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about So we're all here, I think, because here, actually, hang on, let me, if I can probably fix this. Apologies for the delay here.
You can share your slides, actually, if that's better for you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, we'll do that. No worries.
Thank you. Good to keep going? Okay, there we go. So next slide. We're all here because we know the importance of electrification as a way to reduce transportation emissions, and you know, in addition to clean public transit and mode shifting and all those other incredibly important things. Just a quick look at the Tesla family. We've got Model S, Model Y, Model 3, and the newest addition is the SX3 and Y is the newest edition, which starts at 39,000, over 300 miles on a single charge. Some cool features on the car. Doesn't require a key. It connects directly to your smartphone for seamless entry and exit. And mobile app gives you a ton of control over things like charging and even temperature, summon, those things. Next slide, please. The newest additions that are still in pre-production are the Cybertruck and the Semi. Cybertruck is going to start at under 40K for the single motor version, which will have a little over 250-mile range and 14,000 pound towing capacity. And then the tri-motor version is going to be over 500 miles of range. We're really excited about what that's going to do, and you know, particularly in states that have big market for pickup trucks. And then the Semi, which is designed to be capable of 500 miles of range at highway speed, and that's really important because almost 80% of freight in the U.S. is moved less than 250 miles. We're also working on a version of the supercharger for the Semi called a mega charger, which will be able to add about 400 miles of range in 30 minutes. And that can be installed at origin or destination points along heavily trafficked routes. So you can enable recharging during unloading or driver breaks. Next slide, please. So our approach to charging has generally been to minimize the extent to which EV drivers need to adapt their behavior to driving an EV. So making level 3 charging fast and widely available along corridor routes, and level 2 charging available at destinations with long dwell times, like hotels, restaurants, parking garages. These level 2 chargers can recover up to 44 miles of range per hour with a 48 amp wall connector. And we've got 500 of those, over 500 deployed across the state. Next slide, please. We call the approach Charge Where You Park, which is not really a profound name for it, but it's a different approach than trying to replicate the gas station model of going somewhere once a week to refuel. And for anybody who doesn't drive for a living, your car is sitting idle most of the day, and utilities already deliver electricity almost everywhere cars are parked, or at least nearby. So the challenge is that last little piece of infrastructure. Sometimes it's a policy blocker, but to be able to turn all those spaces into opportunities for EV owners to charge where they park. That's one of the biggest opportunities for state and local policy to make a difference with things like EV-ready building codes and rate design. Virginia's actually got a great rate, the low load factor rate that Dominion offers that, if you do the next slide, please. That it's a really cool structure, basically mitigates the effect of the demand charge and inhibiting DC fast charger deployment. We can talk more about that in the Q&A if you want, but as a result, here's our charging map in Virginia. We've got, for supercharger, 218 stalls across 26 sites. And for the last year and a half, the new V3 supercharger, we've been deploying that, which supports peak rates of 250 kilowatts, which means, you know, at peak efficiency, you're putting 100 miles of range on a car in 15 minutes. we're really excited about that as a development. But the most exciting piece is the enormous demand for EVs. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Another good note to end on, and certainly we're here to help think about how to build that demand even further. All right, we've got next up is Tom. Great to have you with us, Tom. You might have heard some of the earlier discussion talking about what's going on in Michigan. Love to hear your perspective on accelerating EVs in Virginia.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for inviting General Motors. Thanks for putting together a really great event. We've had the privilege to be a part of a couple of these now. Always a lot to learn and great conversation. So thanks again for putting this together and having us here. I'm hopefully successfully sharing my screen and slides. Did I pull it off?
We see it. Oh, there we go. Perfect.
Great. Wonderful. So thanks again to, as you mentioned, I'm policy lead for mobility and climate change at General Motors. And just want to share a little bit about what we're doing to advance transportation electrification and touch on some of the roles that policy can play in accelerating this transition. Let me just start by sharing what I think might be familiar to some of you, but maybe not to everyone. You know, General Motors is in the midst of a major business and cultural transformation. Mary Barra embarked on this path with the company, I guess 3 or 4 years ago now, charting this vision for a future with zero crashes, zero emissions, and zero congestion. And we're sort of pivoting every aspect of the business and the culture here at GM to face to that North Star and to march toward it. We'll focus mostly on that middle zero here today, zero emissions, and what that means for us in our business plan. Fundamentally, it comes down to this. GM is committed to an all-electric future in its vehicle portfolio. You see here this great and motivating quote from Mary. We want to put everybody in an EV. We think we have what it takes to do it. There's a societal imperative to do this, and when you think about climate change and air quality, but there are also a great many benefits for the consumer. These are just fundamentally great vehicles to drive and to own. If anyone here has been behind the wheel of an EV, you know they accelerate quick, they stick to the road, there's great torque. But from an ownership perspective, it turns your vehicle into something more like your cell phone. You plug it in at night when you get home, you don't have to worry about it again until the morning. No more trips to the gas station, total cost of ownership improvements. There are a bunch of reasons why we think these are really compelling products for consumers to want and to buy. And that's why we're moving in this direction very aggressively. This all started, of course, in earnest with the Chevy Bolt EV. This is our first pure BEV for the mass market with a long range. This is the #2 best-selling EV brand of all time in the United States. And the latest model delivers 259 miles of EPA estimated range on a single charge. And excitingly, coming up next year, we've got a refresh coming on the Bolt, a bit of a new look on the Bolt itself, a new variant called the EUV, the utility vehicle version of the Bolt. These will feature Super Cruise, our hands-free highway driving technology. This will be the first non-Cadillac to feature this. So we're really, again, sort of doubling down on this idea that EVs bring a lot to the table for the consumer in every respect. More recently, we revealed the new Cadillac Lyriq. This is sort of the next salvo, if you will, in our expanding portfolio. This is the first BEV entry in the Cadillac brand, our first sort of luxury market entry for BEVs, the first crossover built using our new battery technology. We're expecting well above 300 miles of range on these vehicles, very fast DCFC speeds, fast level 2 speeds, and a variety of other benefits. You may have seen pictures of the massive LED screen that makes up the dash in the vehicle, again, making a compelling product that consumers want to buy. And we've got many more exciting announcements coming this year. You'll see the first images of the Hummer EV later this fall. Again, back to that point of expanding the range of vehicles available that are electric. So we'll have crossovers, we'll have sort of the smaller hatchback style Bolt, we'll have entries in the SUV segment, trying to meet a variety of consumer demands, wants, and needs with our vehicles. This is all in service of supporting broader EV adoption, and there are requirements for this in sort of 4 categories. The first 2 are really about the product. We need to deliver longer range at an affordable price. we need performance and utility across a range of vehicle types. You'll see, I think, and agree with me, hopefully, that GM is meeting that end of the bargain with constant innovation and new products. But we also need ubiquitous charging infrastructure and supportive policies. All of this has to come together, or we're not going to crack the nut here. On the EV infrastructure side, GM is taking many steps to advance infrastructure, even from just a business perspective, through things like our recently announced partnership with EVgo. We're tripling the size of that DCFC network across the country. This will be fully publicly available to any consumer, not just GM owners. Powered by renewable energy, targeting 40 key metro areas around the country. Part of this is really about making the business case for public DCFC stand up on its own, so that we can start to see capital investment going to this sector, and it will take on a life of its own. We're also expanding our workplace charging and doing other things to help charging for consumers. But the stuff that I get most excited about as a policy nerd, as a policy guy, are these things, the policies that help accelerate EV adoption. Ultimately, we think we need policy help for years to come, accelerating affordability through reliable and compelling purchase incentives. Ownership perks like HOV lane access really work, and the data show it. They can be causal in driving EV adoption. We want to avoid unreasonable and disproportionate EV reg fees. Virginia's fees are actually what we would consider reasonable and proportionate, so that's great. We want to stimulate demand, really juice the market in these early days with fleet purchase requirements, and ultimately harness the power of markets with policies like TCI or LCFS. And I know that in Virginia, TCI is a hot topic. That's a real opportunity for the state. We can talk about that more in Q&A. There are a bunch of ways that policies like that can actually help improve the market for EVs in a bunch of ways, both generating new revenues for incentives, as well as helping to put pressure on the fuel side of the equation, and creating sort of market pressures that push everything in the right direction. I think I'll manage to sneak in here under the 6 minutes and look forward to more discussion during the Q&A. Thanks so much.
Great, thanks, Tom. Great, exciting to hear about all those new developments and the things to come on that front. And I think all of the speakers have talked about the increasing range of vehicles that are coming up to 250, 300 miles, but yet we know we still need a lot of infrastructure to support that. So we're going to turn to Matt Nelson, hear a little bit more about how Electrify America is working on that challenge. Great to have you with us, Matt. You've got your screen, Matt, but maybe a refresh.
I think I'm alive. Am I alive?
You're alive. All right.
All right. Let me just switch the view.
Great.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me here today. Sue, it's good to see you again, even virtually. Not the last time we had a chance to chat was in Seattle, so we're back to our home roots here. Electrify America, for everybody's knowledge, we're kind of the new kids on the block when it comes to DC fast charging and EV infrastructure. We opened our first station in 2018. And we've grown up pretty fast. We're now the largest network of DC fast charging, open DC fast charging in the United States. And we're a Virginia-based company. We're based headquartered right in Reston, Virginia. So it is a pleasure to be able to talk to Virginia stakeholders today. I mentioned our growth rate. This slide does a little bit of a visual showing where we are. We're in 45 states, and the network is now accessible to 96% of all Americans. So 96% of Americans live within driving distance of an Electrify America station. We're not done yet. We will be expanding to approximately 800 sites by the end of next year. So if you think through that, that's more than one station per business day. So we opened 1.2 stations per business day in 2019. We've continued to open stations at about that pace here in 2020. In 2021, we will accelerate again. Regionally, we have a very significant presence now in Virginia itself with 96 chargers across 20 station sites across all of the major highway corridors and in especially with a significant presence here in the DC metro area. We continue that investment. You'll see the in this map, the gray circles are coming soon sites. So those are sites under construction. You can see that we have quite a few of those circles. The network continues to expand. Technologically, we seek to be the most technologically advanced network of charging in the United States. We feature 350 kilowatt charging, which is the equivalent of 20 miles of range per minute. We provide that in an open network, so it's accessible to anybody with a credit card and accessible on both charging standards, both CCS and CHAdeMO. To do this, we've had to introduce some new technology. So all of our stations feature liquid cooled cables, which are first of their kind. So this has been kind of an interesting growth curve. Most networks test things before they deploy them. They do pilots, they do a couple stations and observe them for a year or two and see what is working and what isn't. We chose to go the more aggressive route, which is that we've deployed hundreds of these and we continue to upgrade them as we go. But it's kind of the old adage of trying to build a plane while you fly it is difficult, and that is what we are trying to do. From a policy perspective, there are a number of really important policies in the EV charging space, in the DC fast charging space especially. The key is in the rate design for utilities. Demand charges and other rate design elements can be really problematic. So in the case of Virginia, this is a real world example of where we're paying $2.02 per kilowatt hour for power. To put that in perspective, we charge our customers 31 cents per kilowatt hour. So that is a pretty big rate design, and it's between 40 and 45 cents is gasoline equivalent. So unless we want to charge people $10 a gasoline equivalent, we need to really think seriously about rate design and rate reform. And then from a broader policy perspective, we have felt like we weren't really the experts on what was effective. From a policy perspective, what we've seen is there are a lot of ineffective policies in the EV space. So we usually defer to NASIO's research. NASIO did a really interesting study working with the Cadmus group to assess the effectiveness of different policies. And what they found is basically the two most important policies, which combined, they say, is worth 50% of all kind of policy effectiveness value. Are upfront incentives, like especially on the hood financial incentives that help reduce upfront costs. And the second was state and locals sending a long-term price signal, or a long-term signal to the market, which is really fancy words that when you look at their write-up, really looks like ZEV mandates and things of that sort. That states and locals can do. Those two policies really are transformative and much more important than dozens of other policies. The other policies that are effective that were also mentioned before that I would like to express support for are building codes, proven effective, and the access to toll roads. So that's us in a nutshell. Hopefully I stayed within my limits, and this is our whole team. We're small and nimble, but we are trying to move fast. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks. Well, that looks like a hearty team. Appreciate that. We're running just a little bit long on time, and we did have a couple questions come in. So I'm going to do just a real quick lightning round and ask each of the 4 panelists just to give us like the one top priority you would have for policymakers in Virginia. I know it's always hard to sum it up, but we'll just go quick around the horn, and then we'll try to get some more questions into our later discussions. So we can go, Matt, we can start with you, and then we'll go backwards. Matt, Tom, Albert, and Keith.
I'll say rate reform. I think it's fundamental to the success of attracting investment. from the private sector. If rates are structured the right way, you can attract investment, and you have to put a lot less public money into your activities in this space.
All right. Tom.
On the hood incentives, 100% should be the priority. And how do you pay for that in a time when states are cash strapped, and we recognize that? Well, an example of how you might generate some of those revenues outside of the budgetary process could be something like TCI or LCFS, creating that pool of revenues without having to deal with the budget challenges that states have right now through taxation. So that's an idea to explore for sure.
Right. Okay. Albert.
I would say building codes, as the prices come down for vehicles and we start accessing folks that live in multi-unit dwellings, that's an enormous priority. So everything that can be done to address that.
Excellent. All right, Keith, you got to close us out.
Wow, that's a tall order. I agree with Tom said, incentives are going to be especially important for large capital equipment and large capital projects. But I would also add that we don't have standards yet in place. And I think the industry as a whole has to move much further towards the types of permitting facilities, as well as the upgrades of the electrical grid to a standard for these much higher charging stations that we're all seeing in our future.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you all. That was a really great set of presentations. Appreciate you being with us and setting the stage for lots of good work to come. And thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
All right. With that, we're going to turn to our last speaker before lunch, Chris Nelder. He's with the Rocky Mountain Institute. You will probably see him on your screen there, but just to kind of get a spotlight here. Delighted to have Chris actually back with us for a repeat performance from a previous boot camp. He's going to drill into a lot of the policy utility regulation issues that were touched on just a little bit there, get into some of those rate impact questions. So let me turn it over to Chris.
Thank you, Sue. Can you all see my screen there? Great. Okay, well, I'm excited to join you all, and especially with the tee up from the previous speakers who emphasized the role of demand charges and utility rate design and the costs of deploying charging infrastructure as it relates to getting permits and so on. I'm going to give you a deeper look at all of those issues right now. So first of all, it's important to understand that level 2 and DC fast charging, or level 3, are really very different beasts. Level 2 chargers typically give you sort of 7 to 19 kilowatts of power. DC fast charging gives you 50 to 350 kilowatts of power. So very different in terms of their power demands. Also, because charging stations on level 2 are relatively slow, vehicles stay there for a long time, hours at a time. And so you can ramp up and down the demand from those chargers through what we call managed charging and provide grid services doing that. That's really not so easy on DCFC. It's basically antithetical to the use case. So because you can't do managed charging very well on the DCFC side, you have to have other ways to improve the business case. Okay, for some reason that did not want to advance. There we go. Okay. So we've done a number of reports on rate design for DC fast chargers in particular, and I just want to give you a quick look at some of our findings. First of all, we think that charging should be profitable, and so we have to be able to also compete with gasoline. So we think the design target for rates should be about 29 cents a kilowatt hour on the utility tariff, or 9 cents a mile or less for operating the vehicle. Level 2 charging is cheaper to do than DC fast charging, so it should also be cheaper for the consumer. EV chargers should also be on dedicated tariffs and separate meters. This is not something that every utility is down with, but we think it's very important. There's a meter built into most charging stations, basically all charging stations, so that should be used. And then, tariffs should provide the opportunity to earn credit for grid services through managed charging, if you can do that. This is a quick look at some of our previous work on rate design. You can see that, we analyzed 5 states up close here: California, Ohio, Colorado, Hawaii, and Texas. And you can see that block of bars there at the left. In most of those states, DC fast charging, and this was a 2016 paper, were not really competitive with gasoline. And this again comes down to this demand charge problem. Whereas in all of these states, charging at home or at the workplace or even fleets using level 2 was all competitive with gasoline. So we really do have a problem with DC fast charging with the rates, the utility rates that control those costs, and we have to deal with that. For those who aren't familiar with managed charging, here's a quick look at it. You can see that in the top chart here, we basically said, this was for the Hawaiian grid. What if we just allowed 23% of EVs in Hawaii to charge in an uncontrolled fashion? And so that's what the top chart shows you. It shows you that most of the charging happens during the afternoon peak, which is where you don't want it. It accelerates essentially what's called the duck curve, for those who are familiar with that. Whereas in the bottom chart, we said, all right, let's deliberately steer that charging into the valley of the load profile on the Hawaiian grid and see what that does. And as you can see, it sort of flattens out the overall load, which is good for the grid. It's highly efficient in terms of costs. And this is what we're trying to get to when we're doing managed charging. I won't dwell too much on managed charging here, but basically this is not V to G, this is G to V. This is just turning chargers on or off in response to grid conditions. And doing so is good for the grid. It allows you to absorb more wind and solar generation, reduces emissions, it gives you all these benefits. But again, managed charging is difficult, if not impossible, and costly with DC fast chargers. So let's move on to the DC FC rate design, because that's really front of mind here. DC fast charging currently is mostly a market failure. That's something that I'm sure the folks at Electrify America would dispute, but it's very, very difficult while the market is young. And so, I think it's really important that we figure out how to have rates that allow for an affordable cost of doing business while the market is young and utilization rates on these chargers are low. Basically, conventional utility rates with demand charges kill the business case. The problem there is that the demand charges are non-coincident. In other words, they might occur at any given time, not necessarily on peak, which is when they're actually incurring additional costs. They do not accurately reflect the cost of service as a result, and they're not consistent across utilities. And when you're a company like Electrify America trying to deploy hundreds of charging stations or thousands of charging stations across the whole country, you're up against thousands of different utility rates, and they all function differently. So that's a problem too. So really, we need new rates for DC fast chargers that are fairly consistent, especially while the market is young and the charger utilization rates are low. This is a quick look at a summary of a paper that we did some years ago, where we looked at, it's at that same paper that you saw earlier, where we looked at, what is the role of demand charges? And as you can see, that demand charge, which is sort of the dark, not the real dark blue, but sort of the medium dark blue color here, can make up to 80 to 90% of a monthly bill for a charging station. That's not the intent of demand charges, and that's the problem. So what can we do? Well, we should have tariffs that are time varying, preferably dynamic, but still allow the utility to recover its costs. The tariffs should have low fixed charges, which primarily reflect things like maintenance and billing, not upstream costs for generation and transmission. They should reflect the actual cost of providing service. And if necessary, demand charges should be coincident with the peak of the utility load profile, not just blind to when they happen. And they should only recover location-specific costs of connection to the grid, not the upstream cost for generation and transmission. Again, this is all a little bit in the weeds for those of you who are not, conversant on utility rate design, but these really are the key principles that we have to talk about when we're before a regulatory commission talking with utilities about how we're going to enable a better business case for charging infrastructure going forward. Most recently, we did a paper for the Colorado Energy Office. That's this paper you see here. We did that last year. And the objective there was figure out what is the good rate design for DC fast chargers. And so what we did here is we compared Xcel Energy's proposal for an EV rate they called SEV. They're the dominant investor-owned utility here in Colorado. Another one from PG&E in California that they called EV Large S, which we adapted to the Colorado context in terms of prices. And then our own rate design, which we put on the table. And we evaluated these 3 different rates under 3 different load profiles. A public DC fast charging depot with 2 50 kilowatt chargers, one with 2 150 kilowatt chargers, and then a transit bus depot with 25 100 kilowatt chargers. And then we evaluated all of those under the DC fast chargers under 3 different utilization rates, 5, 10, and 30%. And again, the objective here was get to gasoline parity at 9 cents a mile. I won't dwell on the design here of the Xcel rate, but essentially, it was a relatively low fixed monthly charge, $34 a month. It had a 2-tier time of use rate, on peak and off peak, and then there was this critical peak pricing adder, which could occur up to 15 days of the year. And then the demand charge, most importantly, was just for the distribution costs, and that was very low at $5.63 a kilowatt. PG&E's design was a little different. This is a 3-part time of use rate, but it's actually matched to the system peaks on their system for appropriate cost recovery. So that's important. And then the rates are stable year round. So there's no winter or summer variant. And this, they were able to demonstrate, and they removed the demand charges. So they were able to demonstrate that this rate design actually allows profitable DCFC operation across a wide variety of load shapes and charging scenarios. So that's important. Finally, here's our own in-house rate design, and the secret sauce here was that we allowed the demand charges and the volumetric rate, that is the cost that you pay for a kilowatt hour of energy, to vary as a function of the utilization rate on the charger. And we designed this to recover the same revenue over 10 years as Xcel's own rate. So we're not asking the utility to give up anything. We use the same fixed monthly charge as Xcel. We use the same periods for the time of use rate with slightly different costs. And so then, as you can see there, that demand charge, which is the blue line in the chart, starts at basically 0. And then as the utilization rate of the charger marches up toward 30%, the demand charge rises as a function of that utilization rate. Likewise, the volumetric rates for the on-peak and off-peak costs start high and get low. So here's the result of this analysis. We found that our tariff with that sliding scale secret sauce produces the lowest cost at low utilization, which is key. We have to be able to allow charging network operators to have a profitable business case while there are few vehicles on the road and demand is on the utilization rate on the chargers is low. So that's that block in the middle. You can see it provides a very stable, very low cost relative to the other 2 designs. Same analysis here, only for the 150 kilowatt stations. And here again, we produce the most consistent cost per mile with our rate design and the cheapest cost when the utilization rates are low. So again, that's really key here. I'm just going to give you a quick glance at our previous, or a paper that we produced in January of this year. And this paper was designed to figure out where are the costs coming from in deploying, especially DC fast charging infrastructure, but also all sorts of chargers, and how do we get those costs down? And our original thesis was that if we could just buy chargers smarter or in larger quantities, we could really bring the cost down. That turned out not to be the case. We thought that maybe by focusing on requirements like the payment system and so on, that would really reduce the cost. And these things do have a small effect. what we found was that the really big problem with costs and deploying charging infrastructure is what we're calling soft costs. And this has to do with basically red tape. It has to do with inelegant communications between utilities and providers. Like the person trying to deploy the charging station is not really getting clear guidance from the utility on where they are in their utility interconnection process. Future-proofing, basically not having to dig up concrete or asphalt and dig a trench and lay in new conduit and conductors more than once. That turns out to be a very large part of the cost, believe it or not. It can be, on the order of 20% of the total deployment cost of a charging station. Getting easements is also a very expensive and problematic part of these deployments, such that, a major network operator might have to evaluate and spend a lot of money to vet like 2.5 sites for every one that they actually build. And that oftentimes gets hung up on just being able to secure the easement for where the conduit goes, and who's got permission to put what where. And then finally, complex codes and permitting processes with the building and planning departments. Again, a very balkanized landscape out there with thousands of different jurisdictions. Every little town has its own building and planning department and might have different requirements about pulling a permit, and that's really problematic. So what can government do about reducing soft costs? Well, at the federal level, one of the main things that we would really like to see is a single federal standard for ADA, that's Americans with Disabilities Act requirements. As it turns out, there's a federal requirement, but there's no standard. And so the interpretation of what is ADA compliant varies from town to town. That's really a problem. At the state level, permitting and utility interconnection can be streamlined. ADA compliance can be clarified as well. A good example to look at here is California Bill AB 2188, which was designed to address this very problem and create a single unified standard for utility interconnection and permitting for charging stations. And then at the municipal level, again, building and planning departments can just standardize their codes and permitting requirements across jurisdictions and offer simple checklists so that the charging network developer knows what documentation they need to provide and be able to apply for their permits online. I'm trying to give you back a few minutes there, Sue. Here's my final slide. This is our suite of major reports that we've done in this area. Thank you for your time. I'd be happy to take some questions.
Great, awesome. Thank you, Chris. And that really was a great follow-on to the earlier discussion and just a sense of how much work is already out there that Virginia can take advantage of. And I know we're looking forward to digging into more of those reports and working with you as well as we move forward. We are at time, so we're gonna try to give people the full lunch break that we promised and get everybody a chance to revitalize. We do want to leave you with two things. One, if you are interested in participating in our fishbowl discussion, which is an open discussion that we conduct later this afternoon, please do send a chat to EV Tech and we'll get you in the queue. You can do that as we're going as well, so you can see how fun it is and decide to jump in. And then we will come back after lunch at 1:15. Andrew Linhart will be leading the charge at that point. Got a great discussion going for that. Right before that at 1:05, if you're looking for a little fun activity, we're doing a Menti map. It's a basically crowdsourced word cloud, and it's a lot of fun. Invite you to come back and participate. We're going to be asking for some input on what policies you think should be moving forward in Virginia. So stay tuned for that, and really appreciate your attention. Let's all go get some lunch, and we'll see you soon. Thanks.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Andrew, and thank you everyone for being here today. The Electrification Coalition for inviting me. This is such an exciting event. I'm going to share my screen here. There we go. It's amazing when that works. So I'm really excited to be talking to you all about the successes that New Jersey has had, particularly with our electric vehicle incentive program. It's been an exciting time in New Jersey, and we currently are, the Board of Public Utilities, the agency I work for, is working on and continues to work on an EV incentive program, as well as some infrastructure programs and some other, I think, really interesting initiatives to help promote vehicle electrification and transportation electrification throughout New Jersey. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what Governor Murphy's administration has done so far, what we are currently working on, and what things are going to look like in the future, and some of our successes and best practices. So a little bit of an overview in New Jersey. In 2019, Governor Murphy signed an MOU outlining the BPU's role, the Board of Public Utilities, in encouraging electric vehicle use. And what the BPU is doing is now currently utilizing clean energy program funds and really focusing on infrastructure, and then of course tracking usage and consumption from charging infrastructure. So that was the MOU. And then in January of this year, 2020, which seems like a lifetime ago now, Governor Murphy signed the state's electric vehicle law, which was really one of the most ambitious, if not the most ambitious, electric vehicle incentive programs in the country. The goal is to have 330,000 electric vehicles on the road by the end of 2025, 2 million EVs by 2035, 85% of all light duty vehicles by 2040, and then also charging infrastructure. So by 2025, 400 DC fast chargers and 1,000 level 2 chargers available to the public. So that was a really, as I said, ambitious law, and it was a great partnership between the state legislature and the administration, and we are currently in the throes of implementing that law. So in accordance with the EV law, the Board of Public Utilities has developed the Charge Up New Jersey program. It dedicates $30 million for the plug-in vehicle fund for 10 years, $30 million a year for 10 years. That plug-in vehicle fund is part of the New Jersey Clean Energy Fund. And so the fund is funded by the societal benefits charge. So everyone in New Jersey, just like in many other states, pays a charge on their electric bill, and it funds the clean energy program. And up until this point, the clean energy program funded energy efficiency and renewables. And then as of the signing of the law, it enabled the BPU to utilize that money for electric vehicles, which really will go a long way to getting more vehicles on the road, and will be instrumental in achieving Governor Murphy's goal of 100% clean energy by 2050 and 80% emissions reductions by 2050 as well. So the incentive program is for up to $5,000. It's based on mileage, on plug-in mileage, and it is up to $5,000, which I think is the largest incentive in the country. And it launched in May of 2020. And it has been a really exciting program, and has, in spite of COVID, had a really, really large uptick. So right now, the current numbers that we have, which I just pulled before I hopped on, we have gotten approximately 3,000 applications for vehicle incentives since May, but they were retroactive to the signing of the law in January. And approximately 2,000 of those have been approved. And most of the incentives have been for the maximum, which is really important, because that means that most people are going for the highest efficiency vehicles. So they are getting the most mileage from the vehicle. And so most of the incentives have gone to that.
Christine, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. We're having a little trouble seeing your slides. If you can put them into full screen. My apologies.
Say that again. I'm sorry.
If you could put your slides into full screen, we're having a little trouble seeing them.
Okay, let me see.
Slideshow.
Put them into full screen. Is that better?
It's doing the same thing. Just continue. Sorry to interrupt you. Sorry.
That's okay. Okay. Well, hopefully you can see that. But so I can certainly talk about it. The vehicles that are included in the Charge Up program must be new battery electric or plug-in hybrid electric vehicles and have an MSRP of less than $55,000. So that was the cap. And that $5,000 incentive really helps to bring down the cost and create parity between electric vehicles and gas-powered vehicles. A couple other things I want to talk about. That is really our key. The cornerstone program is the electric vehicle incentive program, but we are doing, I think, a lot of exciting things in New Jersey around electric vehicles. So want to talk a little bit more about them as well. One of the big goals of this administration and the agency is to bring clean energy to everyone in New Jersey, to all the residents of New Jersey, despite their income levels. And we are very sensitive to that issue, particularly around electric vehicles because of the cost. So we have engaged through a grant with the U.S. Department of Energy. We have engaged Rowan University to do a study to help enhance EV adoption in underserved communities. And we'll focus not necessarily on single resident or single family owned vehicles, but it will be looking at ride hailing options and car sharing options for electric vehicles for those communities. So it's something that we take very seriously. We really want to make sure that clean energy is equitably distributed across all residents and that everyone has the opportunity to be part of New Jersey's clean energy goals. So that's a big a big priority for the Murphy administration and for this agency. We also have a clean fleet program. This is for local governments, school districts, county governments, and it's really helped. It's really to help get local governments electrifying their fleets and being models for the residents, right? So when you see a local government fleet vehicle that is electrified, hopefully it's helping the residents to feel like that could be an option for them as well. So the Clean Fleet program is a $4,000 per battery electric vehicle. Government can get 2 vehicles, and also a $1,500 incentive for level 2 charging stations. We're really encouraging these local governments to have and prioritizing have publicly accessible charging. So that's part of the application process is prioritizing the applications where the charger will be accessible to the public. And it has also been a very successful program. So it's just another piece of the electrification puzzle that we are working on here in New Jersey. Utility filings. So that date is correct. As of yesterday, the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities issued an order aimed at furthering EV adoption in New Jersey by setting minimum filing guidelines for the utilities. We currently have 4 electric utilities, regulated electric utilities in New Jersey. 2 of them have already submitted utility filing proposals, and we're working on them now. I can't discuss them too much in detail since they're active filings. But one is Atlantic City Electric, one is Public Service, and they both have similar components, but certainly not the same. They address infrastructure, they address make ready, they address residential incentives for home charging. And so we wanted to make sure that when we have the utilities coming in the future with filings, that we have them at minimum, putting forward some parameters in their filings that we can use to help expand the infrastructure. One of the big issues in New Jersey, which I know is in the other states, is who should own the charging infrastructure, who should be responsible, how should rates be structured, but particularly who should own the infrastructure. And it was vastly different in the existing filings that we have. So we wanted to make sure that moving forward, we had some parity in the filings. And so one of the key, I think, points in the filing guidelines that we put forward is that utilities should be an owner really only in last resort situations where the private market has not either made requests or expressed interest in ownership. And that's a key part of the order that we set forward. I realize other states are doing it differently. I think in New Jersey, that's the way that we have felt like will be the most equitable, so that utilities are allowed to own if they want to, but there are some parameters that they must meet in order to do that. And a lot of that is around last resort. And part of the, I think the reason that works well for New Jersey is we have vastly different utility territories, and we have such a densely populated state that there really are not a lot of locations throughout New Jersey that would be considered kind of last resort or underutilized at this point. So that is a key piece of the filing guidelines. And I'm just going to stop there. This is my contact information. I'm happy to talk more about any of the programs that we're currently running. We should see sometime in the fall the second phase of the electric vehicle incentive program be launched. It will be the dealer incentive. So right now we have the incentive is an application from the purchaser, but in the fall we will see a dealer incentive where the dealer will just take the incentive off the cost of the vehicle. And so we should see, an even greater uptick. I think now we were so surprised at the vehicle incentive uptick because of COVID. We weren't sure, and certainly the projections that we were seeing were that the market would be a lot slower to take hold because of COVID and because of quarantine, and even dealers were closed in New Jersey for some time. But in fact, we saw very, very high numbers and really, really exciting uptake of the program when it was launched. So I will stop there and thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, Christine. And sorry again for interrupting you there. We're always having trouble with our tech and slide decks. We just had a question come in from the audience, which was, you mentioned that 2,000 of the 3,000 applications have been approved. Can you explain generally
Approximately.
why? Approximately. Why? Yeah. What are the main reasons for denying some of those?
So it's not that 1,000 have been denied, they just all haven't gotten through the approval process. But of those that, of that percentage, the percentage that has been denied, a lot of it has just been that the appropriate paperwork was not in yet. So you have to include all of your dealer paperwork, which is what I think will be really helpful with, when we do the point of sale. The applicant will not have to do all of that. That will be on the dealer. But most of it, the issues and the kind of slowness of the processing has been paperwork not submitted along with the application. So no major flags. I think the only substantive issues we've had were the law itself was signed in January. The program was not launched until May. And the law did not require people to buy their vehicles in New Jersey. But as the regulator, we wanted to make sure that the state was seeing the economic benefit of purchasing the vehicles. So in our regulation, we included purchased in New Jersey. So we had a few and we just did waivers. Because it wasn't in the law, we allowed people who had purchased the vehicle before the guidelines were out in another state. We give them a waiver and gave them the incentive anyway.
Great, thank you for clarifying that.
Sure.
I wanted to follow up on the dealership, the dealer incentives. When you were saying that, in my head, I'm thinking it's getting dealers to be more aggressive in selling electric vehicles. But is it about that, or is it also about making it as easy as possible for consumers to get that rebate when they go in to buy the vehicle?
I think it's really both. I think it's, the dealers having kind of the onus of the incentive helps with people who are purchasing. It's not a really heavy lift, the application process, but it certainly helps to have the dealer there doing that on your behalf. The other issue is just, when you're at the dealer, they can take that $5,000 off the price of the car. So during the car, buying experience, being able to go in and know for sure that the $5,000 is coming off the top versus, not that, it's not unknown. I mean, you can get the incentive, but I think it just gives people a little bit more comfort. But we have not had any real pushback from the dealers at all. They've, I think, been really, really good partners in all of what we're doing. And as I said, I don't think under COVID we could have ever anticipated this kind of uptake of the program. We are certainly not going to have any problem expending the $30 million a year if it continues.
Great, thank you. We're still open for questions from the audience for a few more minutes if there are other ones. The dealership question is one of personal importance to me. I'm very curious, and it's certainly something that many other states are dealing with. Is there something in particular that you think helped get the dealers on board in New Jersey that you're seeing this good reception to these new incentives and regulations and promotion of EVs?
I think engaging the dealers, and if there's a dealer association, we have a dealer association in New Jersey, there are dealer associations in other states, engaging them very early on. The legislation that enabled this program was a very, very long legislative process. We have a great coalition that we work with of the dealers and environmental groups and EV promotion groups that was instrumental in getting the legislation passed and has worked with the administration. So I think, because it was such a long process, we did not have an administration that was friendly to EVs prior to Governor Murphy. So, having this long process where there was a lot of engagement around the legislation really helps to, I think, bring the dealers on board, because they have a lot of input in how the program's going to look.
Right. Great. That's a good tip for us. One more question I think we have time for from the attendees, and it is, why is the rebate only for new EVs and not?
So you'll have to ask the legislature about that, because we actually, there were conversations about pre-owned vehicles. And so I would say, you could talk to the New Jersey legislature about why that is.
Great. And I think that takes us to the end of our time for Q&A. Actually, Christine, I think you have 1 minute. I don't know if you have any closing thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, in terms of the pre-owned, that's the reason that we had conversations about that, is because we want to make sure that equity is a part of vehicle electrification as well. So I would encourage states to really consider all of their options. It doesn't need to be pre-owned, but if there are car share, ride share programs out there that low and moderate income people are taking advantage of, how do we electrify those? Because it is really important. We have not gotten to the place where electric vehicles are affordable for a lot of people. So do take that into consideration. If you are, if all residents are paying for the program, then it's important to make sure that in some way residents have the opportunity to take advantage of it.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And thank you for joining us for this boot camp and giving us some great tips from New Jersey, and good luck to you as you guys continue to move towards really aggressive electrification.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.
Great. All right. Thanks, everybody. We're going to move into, with that as our background on some best practices and success in another state, we're going to move into a bit more of policy discussion as I bring up my slides here. And then we will get into our, excuse me, we will get into our fishbowl as we move to the next section. Sorry, I'm having the same problem on my display. Okay, so what I want to do is take some time here to look into some of the big policies that are helpful and may be helpful for Virginia going forward. And let's jump into it. So to set the stage a little bit, and Sue shared this slide before. This is what the science tells us we need to do in Virginia in order to meet the 1.5 degrees Celsius. It is obviously a very steep curve, but I think we all know that it is possible if we have the will and the effort to do it. And I do want to make a note here that this chart also includes reducing VMT, or vehicle miles traveled, which we are not going to get into in this discussion, but we are, sorry, some of my slides disappeared. And we are going to not get into that, but it's really.
Sorry, just one moment. I'm going to ask you to reshare your screen. I'm just going to walk you through it so we can see the full presenter mode. Can you reshare your screen, please?
Yep.
There we go. That looks perfect.
We're good?
Yep. Thank you.
Great. Sorry about that, everybody. I think as we all have learned, the tech in these days continues to run our lives. So let me just say that VMT, smart growth, transit-oriented development, mass transit, all of these things are extremely important. Other alternative vehicles to reducing emissions and getting us to our goal. But I think we all know that the significant, probably the largest part of this will be moving to a electrified fleet as soon as we are able to do that. So I'm going to run through a few of the areas you can see on what we think are just some ideas on the near-term areas: light duty, freight, transit buses, charging infrastructure, EV fees. These have all been talked about a bit so far throughout the day, but we want to get into a little bit of the policy discussions and set us up for our fishbowl discussion where we can really get into the weeds on a number of these issues. So light duty, we're talking about over 7 million light duty vehicles in Virginia alone. Now there are over 45 light duty models available, which is fantastic. We know that, as was mentioned by Chris, there is a studying an EV incentives right now, a legislatively directed commission, which I know many of the people are either working on or have submitted comments that are on this today. And obviously we will see that hopefully in the next legislative session. So a few of the ideas that have been put out there from numerous other states, as well as some of our own best practices and thoughts from here at the Electrification Coalition. Setting sales requirements are extremely important. Several people have mentioned Section 177 LEV-ZEV program. Even non-binding are helpful to help set a stage where we all know what direction we're moving in. Monetary and non-monetary incentives, as several people have pointed out, we are in a real economic downturn. And so we need to think outside the box on what will help get people to transition to electrified vehicles. We want to also make sure that we are educating people. I think all of us have run into a situation where we're talking about EVs, and I've used the initials EVs, and lots of folks don't even know what I'm talking about until I kind of explain it. So I think we still need some good education. I think the best thing we can do is to get people into electric vehicles. I have yet to meet someone that has driven an electric car and has not thoroughly enjoyed it. And so those are things that we need to continue to do. In addition, on the light duty, we need to work to convert the state and local fleets to EVs as quickly as possible. This helps bring down emissions, obviously, but it also helps show the commitment of the state and helps get the vehicles out there as part of the education. I think that is an extremely important secondary part of electrifying the fleets. You can look through some of the ideas here, and we will continue to discuss these. Moving into the freight context, you can see the huge amount of trucks that move here. $510 billion worth of freight moved annually is a huge amount of money. There are several conversations about the ports. Several conversations about the ports and the freight that moves from those. Virginia is really in a great place to invest heavily in electrifying the freight and moving it around. The Volvo electric assembly plant coming up will be great to adding to the Virginia manufacturing base. And so the stage is set for Virginia to become a leader on these, but we need to make sure that we take advantage of the policy options that are out there. I think it will come as no surprise. There is the heavy duty and medium duty MOU that 15 states plus DC have signed on to, as well as, I think Chris mentioned earlier, California has adopted the Advanced Clean Truck Act. And while that might not be the exact best fit for Virginia, we can see that there are policies out there that will help us move our freight in the Commonwealth towards electrification as quickly as possible. And then, of course, the same on the public fleets. We are seeing more and more of the heavy-duty vehicles needed, things like garbage trucks and street sweepers being electrified that are coming out there. And these are really prime examples and hopefully become low-hanging fruit for the Commonwealth to adopt. Moving into the electric transit and buses, there are approximately 35,000 buses throughout the Commonwealth. We know that Dominion had made a proposal. We can talk a little bit more about that in the fishbowl, as I know that is a topic with very strong opinions from many different sides. But also, we've seen great usage of the VW Dieselgate settlements to help promote electrification. Moving into a few of the opportunities that exist on buses, pardon me. It's important to set goals so that we all know where we are going towards. Anything that can reduce the capital investment needed. Right now, electric buses are still slightly more expensive than traditional diesel buses, but that is a gap that is closing, and there are lots of things that can be done between the utility and the state to help reduce that burden, because we know that the benefits of eliminating diesel and moving to electrification are beyond just the cost. There's the health and climate change as well. You can see we're also looking to update procurement, provide incentives. These are all important things that need to be done in support of setting the goals that are needed. Moving over onto infrastructure and rates, we heard from Electrify America, headquartered here. This is just a quick snapshot of what's been done and where we stand in the Commonwealth right now. We're making some progress. Obviously, I think there's no disagreement that we need to continue to make progress throughout the state. But it is good to see that we're not starting from zero, though we do have a long ways to go. And here are some opportunities for charging infrastructure and rates. EV-ready buildings, this is incredibly important. I know that Virginia is in the last year of the triennial building codes review, but there will always be additional opportunities to continue to push towards making sure all new buildings are EV-ready. Rate design will be incredibly important. We've heard that from a number of people. We need to incentivize charging. We need to make it as affordable as possible, but we need to make it work so that the investments are there that are necessary to support where we hope the electrified fleet in Virginia goes. Number of utility and charging programs that could be done. We mentioned here the low carbon fuel standard. A lot of states are looking at this right now as both a way to reduce emissions and also to generate funds that could be used for electric vehicles. California, again, leading the way on this, puts a price on the different loads of CO2 in the different fuel types, and obviously electricity tends to be the cleanest. And they have been moving that funding into supporting adoption of electric vehicles. So we heard about EV fees. As mentioned, there is a $64 fee in the Commonwealth. And I think just to address this briefly, while this is not what we would call an inequitable or burdensome penalty, anything that is another upfront cost for EV adoption right now, can hurt consumers. They don't want to hear about another fee that they have to pay while they're trying to buy a cleaner vehicle that works for them. EVs make up such a small amount of the market. We are certainly not going to fix our highway trust and transportation funding issues just by putting a cost on EVs. Now, of course, everyone needs to pay for road repair and such, but we need to make sure that that conversation happens in a holistic manner, and that we are not just specifically targeting EVs for a penalty there. And so that is where we are on our ideas for policies going forward. I hope that this will help kick off a great discussion in the fishbowl. And with that, I believe I'm going to kick it over to my colleague, Aaron.
Hi. Can you hear me okay? I'll take that as a yes. All right, so this is the time of the long day on Zoom, and thank you so much for bearing with us and struggling with us through some technological difficulties. But I think we've heard a lot of fantastic ideas. We've had a chance to kind of think through them, hopefully, and now let's discuss them. So we want to have hear your thoughts. We want to do it in a couple of different ways, though. Let's make sure that we're really respectful of everyone's perspective here. Let's not take this opportunity to do your own presentation for 15 minutes. Let's kind of make your point, answer your question, ask your question, let's try to just share our views, our personal views. Maybe we take off our hat specific to a position that maybe you're taking on, and just think about what's best for our Commonwealth here. And how to move EV policy forward. So that's, I think, basically what I wanted to cover. Let's just have a conversation. We've got some great folks lined up to join us, and I'm just going to calling you for a few different questions. If you want to take down the slides now, that's fine. Andy, thanks. Whoever's in control of the slides. Thank you. All right. So the first question is, the group that we've got here together, which are a very impressive group of really engaged and thoughtful folks, if they were going to work together to pass a policy to electrify our transportation sector, what would you have as the highest priority policy? So we just heard from Andy some great options that are out there. We've heard earlier folks speaking to the value of kind of cash on the hood, the rebates funded by a TCI or a low carbon fuel standard. Building codes with an eye toward multi-dwelling units, time of use and rate design, dealer incentives from New Jersey, and then clean cars and 177. Just a few of the options that are out there. There really are just a sea of them in terms of moving EV policy forward. So I'm going to call on, I think, my first crew here. I'm going to ask Lena. What would you pick? What would be the number one priority for you, and why?
Well, I think there would be two priorities, and one would be TCI because it makes so many other things that require funding possible. And the second one would be to adopt the advanced clean car standards. We can have all of these policies that encourage people to buy EVs, but if those EVs aren't in the dealership lots, then all the charging stations in the world aren't going to get EVs on the road. So those would be my two priorities.
Fantastic. And then how about Blair? Are you on with us right now?
Yeah, I'm here. I would absolutely echo Lena. No surprise that I think she's right on the money. But I think it's actually a question we hear a lot in this space, like what is the one silver bullet policy that we recommend? And I think we all know, as it applies to any asset as clean energy, that there is no one silver bullet. We really do need comprehensive legislation. So I would absolutely agree with TCI and clean car standards, but I would add an equitably designed rebate program to that list, because really I think that suite of three policies can increase accessibility surrounding EVs in Virginia as the fastest of any that we've been looking at today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And then I think we have got Annie also in the fishbowl right now.
Oh, great. Hi, guys. Honestly, I would agree that if I had to pick one, well, I'm not going to pick one, I'm going to pick two, and that would be TCI and ZEV as really kind of the critical policies for unlocking vehicle availability and then funding for a whole host of other programs. If I am allowed to contribute something new, I think my other priority would be a real major expansion of utility programs that are supporting electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So we just are kicking off Dominion's rebate program. That's just a pilot, right? It's not, I would say the tip of the iceberg. We need those types of programs across the state and at the scale that it will take to really build a equitable and sufficient charging infrastructure ecosystem.
So it sounds like a lot of agreement and some good ideas here.
Oh, did we lose Aaron on that? My apologies. Sorry about that. Let's go to.
I have no idea what happened.
Are we back? All right, there he is. Sorry about the technical issues.
That's just the day. That's the day we've got today. All right, did Tom get on is Tom in the fishbowl? All right, we will skip Tom. All right, so a question from the chat. Annie, can you explain a little bit about the Dominion rebate program for folks wanting a little bit more detail about that?
Yeah, the Dominion rebate program, it's their smart charging incentive program. It hasn't gone live yet, but it was approved by the State Corporation Commission several months back. And it will provide make-ready rebates and also rebates for charging infrastructure for multi-unit dwellings, workplaces, public charging infrastructure, and also transit. So I'm expecting that that will go live sometime this quarter.
Awesome, that's so great. And then a question for the group: who do you if you're going to win these priorities, these great policies you've all just shared, what are the key messages you think that are going to resonate with the legislators and the folks who are going to be making these decisions in Virginia? Right, we're not there yet. How do we make the case? What's the best case to make? Annie, let's start with you.
How do we make the case?
What are the right messages to really drive home how important it is?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the kind of messaging that I tend to use are, that there are benefits that accrue from these policies far beyond the folks who are actually driving EVs, right? There are some significant air quality benefits. We heard that today, about all of the health benefits associated with EV adoption. But then also it's, there are a lot of ratepayer benefits too for widespread EV charging that's managed well, can actually put downward pressure on rates. So I think looking at kind of the society-wide benefits is an important way to take it away from the kind of message that I often hear and certainly don't agree with, that policies to promote EV adoption are really targeted at the wealthy.
Right. And we also have Shelley in the fishbowl with us as well. Shelley, what do you think, what would be on your list of most important? No one was able to keep it to one policy. I'll give you, if you want to do 3 policies, you can. But if you could do one, that'd be fine too.
Okay, so I'm going to stick with the pattern that has been set or the precedent that was formed before I got started and name multiple options. So what I would like to see happen is threefold. So the first thing that I want to see happen, or conversation that we could have with legislators, is job creation. Given the space that we're in currently with COVID, there are a lot of folks who unfortunately have been displaced because of the virus and the pandemic. So there's a lot of opportunities to provide great, clean jobs in the sector. So who doesn't want to be known as a job creator? And that's a bipartisan issue to be able to create jobs for people in need and help them transition out of the space that we're currently in. So one, I would sell job creation to legislators. Then also, because I'm a public health person and I am all about addressing health disparities and the social determinants of health, the second piece is obviously emphasizing the public health impact of overexposure to air pollution and the opportunity to mitigate the impact that we're seeing from air pollution, greenhouse gases, et cetera. So who doesn't want to protect the most vulnerable populations? So that's young children, that's those who have chronic respiratory diseases, illnesses in the elderly. So there's opportunities to be able to utilize clean transportation as a vehicle, no pun intended, to be able to mitigate some of the impact and overexposure that we see to air pollution. And then the third thing that I want to see happen is utility investment. So there's opportunities obviously for utilities to really invest and make big impactful, impactful and meaningful behavior change to help facilitate that. And an example that we've seen happen in the past or most recently is when you look at what SCE just did in Southern California, where they passed 400 plus million, I think it's $436 million has been allocated to help build out the charging infrastructure with a specific emphasis in frontline, low income and moderate income communities, which equates to about 38,000 electrical charging infrastructure. So, I mean, that's a huge deployment and that could be a huge game changer in that community, because what we see in many communities is that they suffer from frontline communities are experiencing charging deserts. So I think when you have those three, different opportunities and they converge, that this can really make a huge splash in terms of really helping to facilitate electrification.
Fantastic. And I know we're going to lose you in just a minute.
Mm-hmm.
Besides yourself, who I think you're a fantastic messenger, who do you think we need to line up to convince folks in Virginia that this is the right way to go? Who are the—
Yeah, absolutely. So I would love to see, obviously we have existing players and existing coalitions. We've got Virginia Clean Cities, which is a great partner and friend. We have the Electrification Coalition, of course, different legislators who are friends of the movement. So we definitely have folks who are already working and making great traction in the space. But I would also like to see us engage communities that have not often had a seat at the table. So sometimes you got to bring your folding chair and put your seat, your chair down at the table. So that could be frontline communities, that could be tribal communities, that could be, a whole host of folks who haven't normally had a voice. One of the things that I think is important in terms of normalizing EVs and electrification is showing that there are opportunities for all communities to engage and to gain access to clean transportation. And so that's what we try to do with EV Hybrid Noir, is that we try to normalize and show that the messenger matters. So when legislators see folks from all walks of life, whether they're Latinx, tribal communities, they're part of the LGBTQI community, or they're just, a young professional who's recently graduated and is now in their first job. So there's an opportunity to engage across all sectors. It's not just technology for the wealthy, older white guy who's an electrical engineer or a techie. It's really for everyone. And because we're trying to accelerate adoption, it's really critical to engage all different facets of the community, from rural to urban to multi-ethnic racial groups. So it's really an inclusive technology that we need to really be more intentional in making sure that we're being more inclusive in our messaging
Fantastic.
and our outreach.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Shelley, for joining us. Appreciate that very much. We also have Lena, I think, as well. So thank you to Lena for jumping in the fishbowl with us. We have a new participant. So Charles, quick question. What's the policy you'd be most interested in advancing? One to three policies that you'd like to see advanced?
I could say all the above. I think they're all great, but I think the emphasis should be, because in looking at all these policies, the common theme I see is and the way that I think to phrase this, and I think another one of the questions that to bring up is about how to market this or present this to legislators, is the idea that you're broadening the benefits of electrification, because a lot of the speakers have talked about, and it's already happening. So what can we do to accelerate it to the degree that we need to? So I'm trying to think of more in terms of there's benefits to it that we're all aware of. how do we broaden those impacts? And so I think there's those three barriers that everyone's touched on with these policies. You know, the higher upfront cost, you know, the inability. I think one thing that hasn't been mentioned is the inability for some people to charge at home or at work, which are the perfect times to refuel an EV. And so looking at, you know, workplace incentives and things of that nature. You know, the EV Ready code touches on that a little bit. And the other thing I think that hasn't been discussed enough is the lack of availability of EVs at dealerships. And so obviously, you know, having the policies, you know, the air quality standards and that sort of thing is helpful. But there's, you know, I think other levers we can, or things we can address in terms of that piece of the puzzle. And then looking at that and then echoing what Shelley was saying about that, when we're addressing these barriers, to be sure that we're doing that in an equitable and sustainable manner. And what I mean by sustainable is not just from the environmental standpoint, but also sustainable economically. Echoing a comment that was made by Electrify America and some others earlier, that, you know, at the end of the day, you know, folks that are in this space have to be able to make money, you know, in putting in charging and that sort of thing. And so, you know, and thinking about incentives and trying to get more infrastructure installed, and thinking about not crowding out private investment, because of the temptations to use all this public money and to get utilities to do stuff, but that, you know, at the end of the day, you know, we don't want EV charging to be ending up like a telephone booth, you know, where, you know, we put a bunch of them on there and then they're not maintained and they're not used, and then they fall into disrepair. So those are my sort of three big buckets there.
Yeah, those are great buckets. And, you know, identifying some of the barriers that we are seeing, you know, echoing some of the points that Blair made. I think we've got Chris back, who honestly, Chris, you promoted more questions in the Q&A than any other speaker. People really wanted to hear what the state was going to do. So I don't know, this is kind of a loaded question, but what's your favorite policy for Virginia to advance?
That is a loaded question. I was trying to answer some of those questions, but then I think you or Annie were dismissing them as fast as I could type and answer them. So I blame you. You know, so you know, I think I talked before about some of my favorite policies. I can't even in the Chatham House rules tell you which one I think that the administration is going to pursue first and foremost. Though I was heartened to hear all of the enthusiasm for TCI. You know, I think just when it comes to climate and the sort of clean economy transition overall, you know, putting sort of science-based limits and market-based prices on the dirty stuff, so that we can fund the clean stuff, is sort of a good approach to get us going. I think, especially somebody mentioned before, in the current budget climate, having a sort of source of funding, you know, that does not come from tax revenue, but instead is sort of following the polluter pays principle, is a really important way that we can sort of fund our transition to a broadly shared economic prosperity in the next century. And then, you know, I think I was encouraged to be provocative in the fishbowl, and to that end, I will say that while I agree that EVs are naturally bipartisan, if we are talking about a legislative approach and passing policy, we got to look at what the nature of our legislature is right now. And while the strengths of transportation electrification is that we can build a broad bipartisan coalition, the nature of the legislature is we have to look at where are the votes that we need to get policy passed. You know, if we look at recent history with the Virginia Clean Economy Act, the Clean Economy Act was almost didn't make it through, not because of a challenge from the right, but from a challenge from the left. And so to that end, as we think about what are the types of things that we need to make sure we have in place in any type of policy approach that can sort of build on a coalition that gets the thing passed, right? And so thinking about environmental justice and equity is super, super important to that. At the same time, thinking about what are the types of jobs that could get displaced by the transition to clean transportation. You know, opposition will come from, or has come in Virginia from the Convenience Store Association and the petroleum marketers. We don't have an oil industry per se. We don't have refiners, things like that, but we do have petroleum marketers, gas stations, convenience stores. You know, how do we talk about the transition from the sort of mechanic industry. Those types of things are going to be really important.
Perfect. That's great. And then I think we've got Tom actually back. I think he's here now, hopefully. Great. Thanks for joining us again.
Yeah, I'm here.
So yeah, I mean, obviously we can know you're coming from a perspective, but you know, Chatham House rules, we're not recording this or sharing this recording anywhere. What are the policies that, you know, you'd be excited to see Virginia embrace?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And sorry that my webcam is kind of flickering here. Hopefully that's not too bothersome, or maybe it's just coming up on my screen. I think there are sort of a few top priority ones in my perspective, and I mentioned one earlier, on the hood incentives for vehicle purchases. I think one thing that's easy to forget for those of us who eat and sleep this stuff is that this is still a nascent market, and growing it is going to be hard. I think in 2018, total BEV and fuel cell and PHEV sales in Virginia were 1.7% of total sales, according to the Auto Alliance. That is a small sliver of the market. I think the auto industry is confident that that will grow, just to some extent as we expand the market offerings, and I talked about that earlier. But the fact of the matter is that cost parity is a long way away. Many of these vehicles do not make money for the automakers yet today, and that is a problem. And so we have to balance that with the need to keep prices low enough to make them affordable to the mass market. Incentives are the way to do that. We see a need for that for many, many years to come. A number of states provide those incentives on their own, but as we've been talking about, funding those has always been hard. It's going to get even harder for the next couple of years, at least, as we all grapple with the fallout economically from the crisis that we're in. And so we need to find ways to raise revenue to fund those programs some other way besides general taxation. And in Virginia, TCI is just such a ripe opportunity. I know that that Governor Northam is passionate about the environment. I know that there's interest in that program in the state. That seems like an opportunity that the state maybe wouldn't want to pass up for a number of reasons, but one of them being that it can raise revenue to support incentives for EV purchases. But one of the other things that's nice about that, as someone who thinks about decarbonizing transportation as a sector as a whole, is that it also puts downward pressure on the carbon intensity of the liquid fuels. Whether we like it or not, there will be ICE vehicles on the road for a great many years to come, short of some kind of very aggressive turnover policy that sort of switches vehicles before the end of their lifetimes. But we're going to have to use some kind of liquid fuel for a while here. How can we squeeze some carbon out of that along the way? A TCI program, an LCFS program, those things have the opportunity to innovate on that side of things too. And we can sort of put our thumb on the scale in a variety of ways to reduce emissions from the sector.
Great. So you're not right here, right now, endorsing the California move. That's not something you would.
Thanks for asking. Well, look, let me just say, Aaron, that the auto industry and GM, more than anybody, wants and needs the EV market to succeed. And I think our commitment to seeing that through is hopefully very clear to everybody. We're investing tens of billions of dollars in this. We're in this for the long haul, and we're in it to win it. Ultimately, though, I should just say that you know, neither mandates nor bans on their own build successful markets. It's going to take a great many things to do that, including these supportive policies that I'm talking about. So that's certainly important to us. Ultimately, we're committed to collaborating with everybody to make this work in all the ways that we know are successful.
All right. And another question that was kind of targeted towards, your panel, I guess, earlier. You want to make any news and announce any factories you're bringing to Virginia? There's definitely some interest in seeing expansion of those type of economic activities.
I wish I could, but the question is a good one, and it comes from the right place, which is a recognition that this is a real economic opportunity for the United States. We, unfortunately, I think right now, absent coherent federal policy and leadership on electrification, we're missing the boat a little bit here, and really risk losing a lot of the economic growth that can come from this to China, to Europe. This is a chance to create good paying manufacturing jobs for decades to come here in the US, up and down the supply chain, both vehicle manufacturing, battery R&D, battery manufacturing. There's an awful lot here. And you're right, that's a really exciting opportunity. We shouldn't let it go, but no news from us right now on that front. Thanks for asking.
We'll see if you're ready. All right, so Alan, we've got in the back in the fishbowl as well. I know we've heard a lot of conversation, and you've been deeply engaged in these efforts for an awfully long time, Alan. What do you think? Who are the messengers that you think we need to mobilize? We've heard a lot of agreement about the policies that we need to advance. There wasn't a lot of disagreement, but how do we get it done in Virginia is the real question. You're muted.
I think it does tie back to jobs and employers. And so having a dialogue that can bring together those who are suffering in this pandemic, folks who can benefit from a transition, which really approaches all Virginians, with maybe the exception and inclusion of our petroleum marketers. And so what's going to happen over time is a major energy transition, and it's significant. The scale of some of these programs that are small scale, small dollar, but the scale of the economic loss from gasoline and diesel really is enormous. Again, harking back to your own graphics about the $11 billion a year, just such a significant opportunity for jobs. We talked a little bit about trying to bring General Motors manufacturing to Virginia. Well, Virginia's home to Electrify America. It's home to Volkswagen and Audi. It's home to Volvo. These are organizations, these are businesses that are moving things forward. Virginia has a lot of businesses that are otherwise engaged in the battery design process. And so engaging employers is one important area. The other, of course, would be all of us, the massive health challenges, the massive economic challenges of emissions from transportation.
Yep, awesome. And I know we have Robin in the fishbowl as well. If you wanted to turn on your camera and join us, we'd love to hear your perspective. I do see Albert, and we're low on time. We always run out on time. But Albert, I'd like to hear your thoughts on what it's going to take to kind of win policy at the kind of large scale in Virginia. I know certainly Virginia is not a stranger to doing ambitious things on kind of a clean energy front. But what do you think it's going to take to kind of move the needle over the next 6 months to a year?
Well, certainly to move the needle, I think it's going to take a health frame more than a climate frame. I mean, we're in the middle of a pandemic. I had also wanted to answer the question about what policies we need to be looking at. And I think one thing that we absolutely need to be looking at are time of use rates in Dominion territory, either through them having AMI, smart meters, or through sort of independent chargers that connect with their system. Because if we don't do that, we have the downside of maybe driving rates up by everybody charging during peak hours, which nobody wants and could be an unintended consequence.
Sure, right. Time of use rates are critically important. Robin, do we have you in the fishbowl? That's a no. All right.
I see Robin on mute, but I work for Robin Jones, and I would say that one policy.
I did just see an unmute happen. So Robin, can we hear you now?
You can't hear me. My mic is open. So
oh no.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for volunteering to join us. And I'm sorry, again, technical difficulties seem to be the theme of the day. What I would like to say is, we've heard a lot of important perspectives. You guys have shared some really good ideas. The challenge obviously is what are the next steps and how do we actually implement them? And I think, we are absolutely excited about that. And that is, I think, what we're going to go to next to some degree. What are the next steps? So thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks for sharing your perspectives and your information with us as well.
Great, Aaron, thank you. And thanks to everyone that was willing to jump on the fishbowl and give their perspectives and answer some honest questions. We really appreciate it. I am going to take us into the end of the day. And let me bring up the last slide deck, I promise. And I will try to do it correctly this time. see if I did it. Maybe.
Nope, you're in presenter view.
Yeah, every time. There we go. Did that work? Great. Either way, let's move along. I want to do a bit of a, excuse me, just a kind of an overview of some of the messaging that we heard today, because I think it's all incredibly important. Excuse me. From Admiral Harvey, we heard about the importance of transportation electrification, not just on the environment, but as a major issue of national security, which I think is of a particular interest in Virginia with the number of bases and military personnel that we have here. And Chris, thanks again. About the market, I think we know this, that the market alone cannot meet our climate goals. We must lead the way in transportation electrification and policy. We heard a great discussion about that. We then heard from Roman on equity and the importance thereof for EVs and transportation. We must keep the historical injustices in mind to achieve equity. I think that is a lesson for all of us moving into the policy world as we continue to push for transportation electrification. From Alan, we heard great examples of all the work being done throughout the Commonwealth and the cities. Just really great stuff happening, some of which I had not heard of. So it is always good to hear positive stories about this, and that it is really doable in all cities and towns across our state. From Dr. Tamala, we heard about how bad air pollution really is for us. I don't know about for everybody else, but really getting into the details of particulate matter and how it gets into our lungs got me more committed to working on cleaning up our air, and transportation electrification is obviously a huge part of that. We then heard from our OEM panel, and thank you to all of them. Volvo is excited to be bringing many trucks to the area and manufacturing them here, which is great. We then heard from Electrify America, which has 96 chargers at 20 stations throughout Virginia, and obviously they are headquartered here, so it was great to hear from them on their local perspective as well. And thanks again to Albert from Tesla, talking about the work that they are doing in the next round of vehicles they have coming out. Obviously, we expect, everyone always expects big things from them as well. And then, of course, Tom, thank you for coming back and doing the fishbowl again. GM has an exciting lineup of EVs coming out, and it's really great to get a little bit of a snapshot of that. We then heard from Chris Nelder on charging, and he always has great insight. I'm sure he could have done another hour about how charging should be done, so we appreciate him condensing that down to a 20-minute presentation. And then lastly, of course, we heard from Christine with some great examples of what New Jersey is doing, some lessons learned. I think there is a lot to digest from what New Jersey is doing, and obviously adapt to what would work best in the Commonwealth. But it's always good to be able to get some lessons learned and some best examples from a state that's doing it right now. So as we wrap up today, I want to thank all of our speakers again, all of our fishbowl speakers, as well as all the attendees for joining us. We know that everyone is on a lot of Zooms and webinars these days. And so we really appreciate you giving us the time. We apologize for the technical issues, though I think we're all just kind of take that as life these days and part of how we have to do things. So just a few housekeeping notes. We will send you a survey to get your feedback. We're always looking to improve, and we really appreciate you being honest. We will share with you the webinar slides and recording, obviously not the fishbowl part. We will be setting up a new VA EV listserv. You can obviously opt out of that, and it will be probably at most once a month at this point. You will be seeing from us down the road what we are calling our policy blueprint for the Commonwealth. And that is something that we are kind of working on refining. You heard some of the policy ideas that we're thinking about, and details and discussions to hopefully accelerate EV adoption here. And we look forward to working with all of you in the Commonwealth. And at any point, please feel free to reach out to me. I will be your person in Virginia, though we have an absolutely great team here. And with that, I would say thank you to everybody one more time. And we are done with our presentation for today.